Good evening. Welcome. We are entering the work session for the Village of Pleasantville Board of Trustees. Today is Monday, May 8th. First item on our agenda is a remote visit with Anthony R. Carr, our Superintendent of Public Works, regarding the an update on 2023-2024 village capital projects.
Right.
Superintendent Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Board, and Eric, good evening. So, Eric, there's the agenda that you had circulated to me internally for the order. Do you want to still proceed in that order?
Yes, yeah, let's start with the pool, if you don't mind.
And I am here in the village. I'm down at DPW, but my camera is off for bandwidth, and I don't know if I could even start my video.
That's all right. We like the red hotline phone.
It gives a little levity to maybe a long day for some. All right. So let me just share my screen very quickly. And we'll start with the status of the pool reconstruction project. Just opening up my PDF, and I have multiple PDFs open, but okay. Okay.
Okay, we see it.
All right, you should see a construction schedule. So, Eric, Mayor and Board, this is the first construction schedule that we received for the project. We did work diligently with both consultants, i.e. DeBruin Engineering, who is the site civil, and really will be handling the civil portion of the project, and Steve Rinkunas from Rinkunas Engineering, who's handling the pool project, the pool portion, I should say, in the pool house. So it's one project, i.e. the pool reconstruction project. However, this schedule breaks up at the higher level, 3 different phases, right? You have your design development phase. That's pretty much what you need to do up until contractor bidding. You have your bid phase, which is self-explanatory. That's when the documents are 100% ready and out for contractor bidding. And then you have the construction phase, which is obviously as construction starts and ends. So with that being said, I'll talk. If there's any questions, please feel free to interrupt. I'm not going to keep bouncing around the schedule too much, but this is really more for informational purposes, and anything I share tonight, I will circulate after the meeting. And if there's any follow-up questions too, we could certainly have another discussion. But you'll see working backwards that, you know, prior discussions and me getting on board and myself and the building inspector taking more of a deeper dive into the project, we were able to bring the project to this point. Okay, so what's that point? The point is we have a schedule, and the expectation is that construction would basically be completed by Memorial Day of 2025. Now, working backwards here is Labor Day of 2024. So what I've learned from working with the pool consultants is that you typically want to start construction of your pool right after Labor Day so that you have it the next Memorial Day, right? So that's kind of how, just working again high level, we're targeting a Memorial Day of 2025 opening, which does mean that we lose a 2024 season. So the numbers you see here, it's 36 weeks, right? W is weeks, D is days.
Just to be clear, we don't lose the 2024 season. We have it in the old pool.
I'm sorry. We don't have a new pool for the 2024 season, Mayor, correct?
Yes.
Utilizing the existing pool.
Right.
I know prior to myself joining, there was a hope that we might have the pool by the Memorial Day of 2024. Unfortunately, that's not the case. When you start looking back at the top, the design phase itself pushes you out to about March of 2024. Well, what's that design phase? That includes Department of Health approval. That includes all the site civil permitting approvals from all the different regulatory agencies, DEC for your stream protection permit, the Army Corps for various nationwide permits. So there is a level of federal and state involvement that is always a question mark and a wild card, which is why these bar scales might be accurate, or they might be a little bit longer than anticipated to be conservative. So you have the pool and the pool house, DOH, right? DOH permit review, Westchester review of backwash. That's just the backwashing operations, how we're going to discharge the sanitary sewer. That's actually currently going on now. Will be going on soon. And then the pool construction documents, which if you look, there's a lot of overlap with the different days, and these arrows mean that certain tasks are dependent on others. But if you focus basically on the gray bars, that tells you the amount of days, you'll see 226 days, 60 days, and then 255 days for each phase, right? So the gray is each phase. So basically this puts us on target to really have all the permitting done for this project by early next year. I mean, we're in what, June now of 2023. But if you look at the permitting review here, this goes to November for the civil permitting. Again, that's DEC, that's Army Corps, et cetera. And then you have the permitting here and the pool house work under the design phase. So really everything all in pushes you out to February, March. The permitting is expected, I misspoke, should be done by the end of this year, right? December 2023, early January 2020. Right. So that, again, it could go a little bit longer, could go a little bit shorter, but the design phase in its entirety, meaning permits are secured, the pool consultants finished with their work, and then the site civil consultant, which is doing everything other than the pool and the pool house, i.e. drainage, utilities, fixing some of the on-site drainage issues that we've encountered now with the soggy ground, and also planning for flood mitigation as well. So the site civil is doing everything that the pool and the pool filter building is not involved with. So that puts you really right at March of 2024. Then about 60 days for bidding, that's advertising, that's getting bids back, that's evaluating it. And then that's a construction start of June of 2024. Now, before you could actually break ground, there's a lot of things that need to happen, i.e. submittal review, right? What materials are they using? Are they the right materials? And a lot of different pre-construction coordination that the consultants will have to be involved with that will take about 13 weeks and bring you to Labor Day of 2024. So there's a lot of upfront administrative paperwork, not digging, not work stuff, not site work stuff that needs to happen prior to September of 2024.
So Anthony, at one point in time, we had a conversation with Steve Rakunas about the idea of getting a contractor through the bidding process and on board early enough to order long lead time equipment and materials, with even the possibility that we might find a place on village property for them to be stored in advance of breaking ground. Is that, doesn't look like there's time to do that, and does it matter?
Mayor, there is, so as part of the construction phase, the submittals and the procurement really is the material procurement. So it doesn't say that there, but this is the pre-construction phase where contractor provides submittals, the engineers, i.e. the pool engineer and the site civil engineer review and approve, and then the procurement is that the contractor will start ordering them. So that's 13 weeks. You know, that's a little over 3.5 months to get things in order. And then obviously
it may be that the supply chain issues that were more severe then have eased. You know, there was some suggestion at the time that some of the equipment might be 6-month lead time. Is that not what people are saying now?
That is not the feedback as of right now with the consultant, but I've asked them to look into that amidst.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yes, as we get closer. Yeah, you know, I hear mixed things too about the supply chain issues. We're encountering supply chain issues on some things, other things we're not, as far as public works is concerned. But as we progress through the process, we'll certainly firm up the lead time. And if this needs to truncate over to the left or extend slightly longer past, not much past, but a little bit past Labor Day, right? The end goal here is Memorial Day of 2025. So that's what we're working on.
Okay.
And we will certainly course correct along the way if we do see lead times associated, longer lead times associated with any of the material.
Well, I thank you for your diligence on that. Obviously, the delay in the schedule is not what anybody hoped, but it's also what clearly we need, and I appreciate your efforts in pointing that out.
Very welcome. Mayor, do you want to, and Eric, do you want to talk? I can pull up the FEMA map. If you want to move on from the Pleasantville pool, we can do that. If you want me to pull up the FEMA and discuss a little bit about the flood mitigation, we can do that in a separate meeting. It's really up to you.
If we have time, I'd like to see that. Do we?
Sure. Let me.
Sure. Go ahead. Show us the FEMA.
Stop sharing, and it's not a plan, but I just wanted to show you the FEMA.
Hard to say no to the opportunity to talk about FEMA.
Right? I mean. Okay, so you should see a FEMA flood map. This is FEMA's.
We see it.
National Flood Hazard Layer viewer. So
Yes.
There's a bunch of colors here. Let me slide a few things out of the way so I can see the screen. But really, here's the gist. This is the pool and
Right.
the recreation building, right? And you're going to see different colors and boundaries. But just to give a quick high level, this orange area, and obviously you see the lake, and then
Yep.
the brook that travels underneath the recreation building about here, goes through a pipe and then outlets right over here. So what the orange boundary is the 500-year storm. What is that? That's a chance, that's a 0.2% chance of a storm event annually occurring under that scenario, right? So it doesn't occur necessarily once every 500 years. It just has an annual chance of occurring of 0.2%. This area you see here, this is a very strictly regulated, highly regulated area known as the floodway. What's the floodway? The floodway is the area of a riverine bank. It could be a coastal body. It could be any body of water where it's very high velocity. And if you do anything inside of there or affect it in any way, it could create adverse impacts downstream and around the site. So it's super sensitive. FEMA has what's called a zero rise policy, that if you do work in a floodway, which we're not, but if you do work in a floodway, you have to show a zero rise, and it's almost impossible to get them to approve anything because they always look at it like, well, you have other alternatives. Why do you have to work in the floodway? So the floodway plus this other little blue area that you see here, so the non-striped area, the non-diagonally hatched area, plus that blue area, that's called the flood fringe. So the flood fringe is basically where the water's slow. It's kind of still water. It spreads into your backyard, might go into your house, but the floodway plus the flood fringe equals the flood plain. So when someone says floodplain, it's actually both things. But what's interesting is, from looking right at this and obviously being involved in the project and having flooding experience, I looked at and I noticed that it's very important that you see that it says limit of study. So every community has what's called a flood insurance rate map, a firm, and also an FIS, a flood insurance study. And the study correlates with the map, and it gives you all this technical information about how high the water is, how fast it's moving and how far it spreads. So they stopped the study here, which if you look, the tennis courts, if I zoom in right over there, and that's basically where probably the pipe goes under the building and out falls there. So they cut it loose, they truncated the study and said limit of study. So the 100-year, this blue and kind of red hatched area is the floodway, right? But that's the 100-year floodplain, or the 100-year flood area, we'll call it, right? And then the orange is the 500-year. Well, it's when you see that red line here and they just kind of stopped it short, it means that they don't have sufficient information to correlate and continue the study and basically extrapolate what would probably likely go up towards the lake. I mean, the water doesn't stop vertically and say, okay, we don't do this anymore. And the hydraulic behavior doesn't just stop so abruptly like that. But they obviously indicated that because that's all they have. So if today FEMA did visit the site, or there was another natural disaster or a major tropical storm, they would either ask for more information or they would send their field representatives out and correlate more information and have the study updated. Of course, we could have the study updated at our request too, but that's not necessarily the focal point of why I'm showing you this. It's more of the essence of preparing and justifying even more so why we're now introducing flood mitigation to this project. And I know that there was a series of memos from De Bruin, very good engineer. I agreed with everything that they said, but I know that the board prior to my arrival was discussing basically if we should or shouldn't put a culvert and be a secondary source to mitigate the flooding on the site, right? And I know there was costs, operating cost evaluated. There was how much is the alternatives going to cost? I know there was alternatives 4, 5, and 6. So I looked at a lot of those numbers, and they used what's called a FEMA flood mitigation grant, a cost benefit ratio, right? And if you looked at the number, I think it was around $150,000 of a cost of cleanup over 30 years. And I know we pulled out certain storm events during certain seasons. And then you looked at the cost of the construction, which was $1 million. Now you have this $150,000 divided by the million, and it gives you this number, right? And it would give you about 0.1, right? A 0.15, which in FEMA's world, they say anything less than 1 really shouldn't be it should be a no-go, right? So it kind of gives you a little bit of an incentive of what to do and a little bit of a guide. But that $150,000 number, really, when I started delving more into staff time and some costs that were not capitalized, they weren't captured. When I started looking at that 150 number could be arguably a bit higher, closer to the 250, 300. And I say that just because now when you look at the different alternatives, which we're exploring now, one in particular, the flood mitigation for the 25-year storm event, which is a 4% chance of occurring. It's not quite the 100, but it gives you something that's not there now. And the 25-year storm event is a storm that's commonly dealt with at the local level. 100-year storm event, everything's catastrophic, everything's backing up. You have to start weighing your options, right, and doing that cost benefit. So when you look at the 25-year option, which again hasn't really been finalized yet, we're still working with the surveyor and we're still designing that, but the conceptual cost was about $400,000 to $500,000, right? So if you look at that cost for that project, just for the 25-year storm event alone, while you're digging here, while you're excavating for the pool, while everything's open, and you take advantage of the fact that one contractor's there already, they're mobilized, they're working, they're doing things. When you look at that study, what the Bruin did, it was about $400,000 to $500,000. I forget the actual number. And even if you brought up the operating cost to, let's say, 250, right? And we just made it 250 divided by $500,000. Those numbers are close, but maybe not exact. Now your ratio goes up to 0.5. And, and I was looking at it some other ways where you can actually probably get 0.66 and 0.75. Anything over 0.5 really is when you should start looking at things. And then you start combining the limit of the study. And then that might actually extend up someday, or it could be very well extend up now if FEMA came back and said, hey, we want to revise this study. Oh, and by the way, you have a floodway between your lake and that brook, which is where the pipe outlet. So, it's a combination of the limit of the study, right? It's a combination of protecting your assets from future damage, which, the Bruin report did say that after the 10-year storm, this lake starts to breach, right? So, when you start looking at numbers and you see 100-year flood and you start putting everything together, it appears, and it is our professional recommendation that, the village do consider the 25-year storm event relief from the 25-year storm event, meaning that whatever new flood mitigation measures installed, it could safely pass the 25-year storm event without overtopping, without overflowing. It could convey the entire amount. Now, when you have the 100-year flood or the 50-year storm, you're still going to flood, but it won't be as exacerbated. It won't be as extensive. So if it flooded 4 feet, maybe now it floods only 2 feet, 1.5 feet. And that might be a difference between what happens and doesn't happen inside this recreation building, which we know is not raising up, right? We're building a new pool. That's going to be slightly higher. We're going to have the pool filter building, right? That's going to be all protected. That's going to be higher. That's going to be flood proofed. Also another FEMA term, but this is not. So, and there's a lot of assets in there that the village wants to protect too. So, it's not recommended to not look at to look at just only the pool. Have to look at this existing building too. And again, that has a culvert underneath it now that's fairly old. It's a stone wall culvert. God forbid something happens, it collapses, it gets clogged. You'll have a secondary measure through some kind of pipe or conduit that connects back out to this brook down here. So I just want to go over the high level. A lot of times with these ratios and numbers, there's also a bit of experience that's factored into it too. And it's also looking at, little things like this limit of study. That's important. So if one just looked at it and said, well, you're in the 500-year floodplain, you don't have to do anything. That's not exactly it. And under the NFIP and the village's flood damage prevention ordinance, we should be looking at this. And do you need the 100-year Cadillac? No, you don't. You could, but when you're weighing all options and cost being one of them, the 25-year storm event we feel is a healthy balance for flood mitigation for this site.
Can I ask Anthony, why are they still using the 500-year flood measure and so on when we know it no longer really applies? I mean, those ways of quantifying years don't apply in the period of climate change that we're experiencing.
Well, the 500-year, I'll tell you, the 500-year flood, the floodplain boundaries, right, and the 0.2% chance storm, the flood hazard. 500-year floodplains are used for critical facilities. So if you're building a hospital, a police station, a fire department, and you have generators, emergency generators, first floor elevations, they very much do look at the 500-year. So they say, hey, look, if your facilities are that critical, they can't force you, they being FEMA and the NFIP, but it is written in their literature that the 0.2% annual chance storm is really targeted for critical facilities.
So when saying 500-year, 100-year, 25-year, we should just be thinking of those as different quantities, of like degrees of
hazard.
Likelihood.
Yes,
right.
Degrees of hazard, basically. What percentages? You can get 5 50 storms within 2 months. It's just a degree of hazard. It's a severity of a storm event, and you can get multiple storms within one event. In Norwalk, when I was there during Isa East, you had it morphed from, there was certain 15-minute periods where it was 100-year, then for another 15 minutes it was 500-year, then it went to 250. So it was actually an average of maybe like a 200-year storm, but it continually changed.
So what does that mean? So is that the amount of rainfall? So it's really a quantity of rainfall that determines the?
It's the depth, the quantity of rainfall and which is hydrologic and how it behaves
Right.
in the land, right? And how it impacts your hydraulics. So your rivers, your banks, your streams, your lakes, your reservoirs, your the coastal regions. So it's a depth and that impact on the receiving water body and how that water body responds to the severity, right? So how far does it spread out? How fast does it move? Does the velocity start increasing and start eroding its banks? Does it spill over and start going into people's homes? So it's kind of like everything from when the raindrop comes out of the sky, how much falls on the ground, and how it impacts the receiving water body.
Okay,
And in this case, your receiving water body is Nantahala Brook, which is
so
Class C.
going
Yes.
back to the plan you were discussing, so you say if we put this additional culvert in to divert what would quantify as a 25-year flood, that would then mitigate the impact of larger floods as well. So it wouldn't necessarily stave off any flooding, but it would nonetheless improve the situation overall.
Right, because you'd have a second pipe here, right? So picture you have the 100-year flood, quote unquote, you have an Ida, right? If that pipe had been here, the water surface elevations that we have recorded, that staff recorded and that Steamer Kunis recorded, that are now on dam merit surveys, which are going to be used to design our future flood mitigation and culvert, all that empirical data and all that field data is gonna be, part of the design. But yeah, if you had an extra pipe per se, the water level would have been lower.
Okay,
You still would have flooded, right? Because if you had two conduits instead of one, you still would have flooded because to a point, your
Right.
flooding is controlled by your receiving water body, right? So there's only so much that this water body can handle before it starts backing up.
right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I would have shown a plan from the consultant, but and you've probably seen it before you tonight. The De Bruin engineering proposal is before you for professional services. That is to have them start doing part of what we're talking about here, and in response to our DPW's request for a proposal to start doing all the site civil engineering. So there will be a plan in the near future, and I'd be happy to come back and share it with the village administrator and yourselves in a separate meeting.
Great. All
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
What's
Okay,
next on the list?
let's see. I'm checking it right now. Okay, Memorial Plaza. Yeah, stop sharing this. Stop sharing the screen. Thank God I have two monitors.
Yeah, I never did, and then once I got it, you can never go back.
I never thought I needed two monitors, but that I've changed my way of thinking. Okay, so let me just a brief high level. These are plans that the Department of Public Works had put together over the last few months in consultation with the village administrator. So just to take a high level, this is the existing conditions plan at Memorial Plaza, as is now, with none of the 70 Memorial Plaza improvements, none of what we're proposing up here, and none of which you're going to see in a few seconds. So this is what's out in the field right now. Double yellow stripe, Bedford Road, Manville Road, slip lane, existing conditions map, base map, survey, all different names for it. This was a map this is basically an overall, I'll call it a master plan. This is something that DPW prepared. When I first arrived and Eric sat down and went over all these projects, and I was in the first few meetings too at Manville Road and Civic Space, I said, wow, I got to make heads and tails out of these things. And if I can't make heads and tails out of it, how do I expect anybody else to do it as well? So what I've done is I put together basically an overall, I guess, master plan or a phasing plan, if you will, of Memorial Plaza that shows each project by color code. So just to dive right in, this red boundary, and again, stop me if there's any questions, please, but this red boundary is basically the limits, or at least the western limits, of the Manville Road Corridor project and how it specifically affects Memorial Plaza. So I know Manville Road project goes way off the screen, but for purposes of this discussion, this is really just limited to how the impact of Memorial Plaza, right? Yep. The second project was the Civic Space, which is shown basically in blue, Manville Road Corridor project in red, and I could slow down too, but you'll see phase one, fall 2023 completion, Manville Road Corridor project. And I listed the consultants who's working on that, right? So that's phase one. That's phase one only because it's pretty much started already and it was in progress. So working from the south up, which I think that Mayor and Eric and board, you may be more interested. Again, this is Bedford Road. This area in the purple is basically the ongoing construction now in front of 70 Memorial Plaza. The gray shaded area is new sidewalk and curb. These angled lines are striping, 45-degree striping. Any kind of line work you see as diagonal, that's also an island, striped island. Again, this is the bump out. I'm not sure if all or any have seen it yet, but this is the bump out right across from the gazebo, which is right here. And that little square right here is the yellow tactile ADA warning ramp currently installed at the gazebo. So just to give you a frame of reference. So this is the new sidewalk. This is about 205 linear feet of curb and sidewalk. This bump out is about 450 square feet. And this is early on when I first started, we estimated, spring of 2023 completion, but we knew from talking to the developer and Mayor and Eric, we've had the discussions too that, okay, this is probably going to go a little bit longer to April or May. So here we are now in May 8th. And as it stands today, this is the basically the driveway to the Lane property or to the post office, right? So this new striped island is out there right now. Public Works did this last week. Post office is right here. Future public breezeway, accessway, walkway, and then there's a 70 Memorial development. So about that 205 feet of sidewalk is almost in, minus the last 20 feet, which the developer is using right now as an accessway to his backyard, to the courtyard for landscaping material and final site restoration in the back. So that's right next to the to the Taco Project restaurant. So the last 20 feet is not in, but the sidewalk is in, curb is in. This angled, we'll call it traversable curb, but it's basically a sloped curb. So that when vehicles come out of here or vehicles turn over, they're not ripping their tires or damaging their vehicles or personal property. So that curb is here. This bump out's in. That ADA ramp is in. Sidewalk is in all the way to minus 20 feet, so about 180 feet. That's what's in here as far as 70 Memorial. What they have left is basically the implementation of these parking spaces, 13 new angle parking spaces, which DPW is going to stripe. So we're going to put the 4-inch wide stripe, but they're going to do the island and they're going to give us that first line right here. So we'll work off, we know the measurements off of here, perpendicular, all the techie engineering stuff that I'm not going to bore you with tonight, but they're going to give us that first island and we're going to work off there. So the plan is at a high level, okay, you have angle parking here, which is more like 60-degree angle parking. This is 45 proposed, not there yet. You could see the existing parallel parking spaces right below here. There's actually nine existing parallel spaces. And after that's done, that's about 13 angle parking spaces. So there's a net increase of 4 parking stalls below there. And it matches what you have on the other side. So that's ongoing. And it is expected by the end of this month that the entire sidewalk down to that alleyway will be finished. The island, this is already in. The only outstanding item now is that the developer has to mill and resurface basically to the middle of this existing double yellow line, okay, which are currently blacked out by DPW. So he's going to mill and resurface that. Why is he going to do that? Because the road's in actually decent shape. He's going to do that because he needs to make up some grade and some elevations to get his curb to a lower reveal, because for those who haven't driven by, you'll notice that the curb is significantly higher on this end, about 11 inches reveal, versus down here is about 6 inches. Reason why was because myself and the building inspector did work with the developer and his contractor to ensure that the entire sidewalk is ADA compliant based on the face of the building. When I say ADA compliant, the slope from when you walk out of this building to the top of that curb needs to be 2% or less. Okay, so and obviously he has doors and there's some other things that lend a little bit of thinking and laying out in the field. But that's why you'll notice that it almost looks like a small little wall on this corner, because what they're going to do is they're going to mill and resurface and regrade the road slope. So a drop of water will go kind of this way towards the gutter. They're going to modify this grading, kind of pick up the crown a little bit or pick up the slope, reduce the slope of the road, put a little, I'll call it a little shallow depression that runs along the gutter to get water to this catch basin that's down here. So they're not going to do that until probably before Memorial Day, before May 30th. So by the time the end of the month is here, we will have had this bump out installed, this sidewalk in its entirety. This area will be milled and resurfaced with new pavement, which is again about 200 feet long of new pavement. And then after that, once they modify the grading for the pavement, then we can go in and stripe off their island stripe. So because we didn't want to open up the area now. And I told Vito too, I said, keep the area closed and secured for a couple of reasons. We want the concrete, right, to cure. We don't want anyone damaging it. We don't want anyone thinking they could park there, but more so too, since if we just took the fence off and we put temporary striping right now, again, you'd have that 11-inch curb down here and 6.5-inch here. And that's no good, whether you're parallel parking or angle parking. You damage vehicles and doors, and people can get hurt and trip. So he's going to keep it closed until he can repave this area, which is scheduled for the end of this month. So that's the first thing. But in this scenario, the existing double yellow line moves over about 7 feet on average. So the middle of that double yellow line to the middle of that double yellow line moves over about 7 feet to accommodate an 11-foot wide travel lane on each side of the double yellow.
On that exact point, this is Michael Pepper. Thank you for all of this. When the bump out went in, it looks really big to the naked eye, and several people asked me about it, and I assume you can confirm that like a semi truck can get through there, and it just looked really narrow. So can you talk us through that?
Yes. So I standard travel width for a lane is 12 feet wide. Now you hear a lot of complete streets, road diets. You'll hear all the buzzwords. A lot of people want to shrink roads down to 10. I do not recommend that. It's a very narrow corridor. And again, there's different schools of thought, but just from my experience and for transportation and traffic engineering, 11-foot lanes, I feel is a healthy balance, right? So first, the New York State and Connecticut State DOT, they don't like to go lower than 11 feet. Westchester County told us they don't want anything less than 11 feet. And then we obviously internally, locally also felt that 11 feet is traffic calming enough, but it doesn't scare motorists and pedestrians to start cheating towards the middle of the road, which is what tends to happen. If you have 10-foot lanes and you start shrinking that corridor, people get nervous, people get scared, and they start cheating towards the middle. And that increases the probability of head-to-head collisions, which is why they also have centerline rumble strips, not in this project, but that's why they introduced them. So there's different traffic calming measures going on here. I do like the bump out, and I do agree with you. At first, because there was nothing there before, the massing looks like it's in proportionate, but we actually had to move this in a foot, and this is drawn to scale. It was actually a foot closer. We had them push it in during the construction, during the layout, and you do have 11.5 feet now. Basically, I'll show you. Let me zoom in on this. So you will have 11.5 feet from the face of that curb to the middle of the new double yellow. And then obviously, and they do consider, believe it or not, they do consider the middle of the double yellow part of the travel lane. So when I say 11.5 feet, that's from the middle of the two lines to the face of curb. Now, obviously, you're not usually driving on that on the double yellow line closest to you, right? There's a little bit of a shy distance, but they do consider that. But clear from the outside double yellow to that face of curb, you have 11-foot 1 inch. County's happy. And I personally watched it over the last 2 weeks. I watched the B line go down. I watched the multiple WB67s, tractor trailers. Those are the big Target trucks. I've seen box trucks go there. And honestly, it works perfectly. People don't slow to a point because they're scared. There was a little bit of an adjustment for the temporary striping that you see out there now, but motorists and even pedestrians walking are used to it. And that does happen over time with driver familiarity, but nobody had to stop short. Nobody hit the cones or the barrels. The bus flew through. The truck glided. I didn't hear them hit their air brakes. So they kind of just probably laid off the gas and went through. Pedestrians seem to be okay with it. But I do agree. Since you didn't have anything there before, it looks big. But if they put planters out there, or they dress it up a little bit, it'll take away from that sea of impervious area, from that sea of concrete.
Okay. Well, you say you've seen if there's a bus waiting there and a truck coming in the direction that they will be able to pass each other.
And also,
Yes.
zone, near the post office is perhaps our most violated crosswalk zone. Folks trying to get across have routinely struggled to do so. I don't want to forget, I mentioned this at one point, it's a very small point, but that point of the right there where your cursor is, the last diagonal space next to the gazebo, the curve comes to a sharp point there in the plaza. Yeah, right there.
Yep.
And not necessary because the car's tires don't go that far. And if there was a way to eat that up, and it's a little bit of a trip hazard, I find.
Yes, we will. Yeah, I've noticed that even down here too, the concrete kind of comes to points, but you'll notice when we go up to the next phase, which we'll call it the Northern Parking Island phase or phase, phase 3.
So that one piece, it sort of intrudes into what otherwise feels like a sidewalk plaza. And if at some point in time, maybe not now, we could fill in a piece of that, I think that would help.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned planters in front of 70 Memorial Plaza. At one point, there was a conversation about, should there be a tree pit or whatever? So what did they land on in terms of greenery?
I believe they landed on irrigated tree pits, spaced at the columns. I don't know the exact spacing, but I know that
he's putting in irrigated planters that are irrigated inside.
Sorry, irrigated planters.
Against his building. Right.
Oh, okay.
Yes, irrigated plant. And then the thought too, after seeing this island, again, this hasn't been formalized, this discussion, but the thought was, okay, big concrete area, maybe putting a planter here, planter here, planter there would obviously add landscaping to it, but also kind of guide vehicles out, make pedestrians feel safer if they're out there. I don't disagree with that logic.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
But the developer's putting these planters in will plant and maintain them at his own expense
Correct.
into the future. So, great.
Okay. So last, certainly not least, this portion of the project, this being the green area, right? This is phase 3, Manville being phase 1, this being phase 2, and that finishing up phase 3, finishing shortly up after or around the same time as the original phase 2. So this island that you see here, this is a landscaped island. You can see the little symbol for ground cover. It looks like a cloud, right? That just means that, okay, there's landscaping. We're proposing landscaping that area. The little circles are understory trees, things that don't really grow too big and don't have a deep root system. Because as we know, our intent is to keep the landscaping and the greenery aesthetically pleasing, discourage pedestrians from walking across the island, but also something that's low maintenance, salt hardy, drought hardy, because this area won't be landscaped. And also because you have a concrete below the 2 inches of asphalt, you have, I believe, 14 to 16 inches of concrete from the old road. So there's very, things get costly. So you basically have a big concrete cap over this whole area. And I saw it myself when they were working here. So there's only so much you could do for landscaping wise. So we did ask the consultant, Wagner Hodgson, to give us provide a landscaping design for the center island. But not to digress too much, the overall flow of traffic, as you see here, you have angles as you come up north, right? Shifted double yellow, bump out, traffic coming here, 11-foot 1-inch clear travel lanes, but really 11-foot 5 inches, we'll call it. As you go up, the thought was, and this is where, I could show you 2 different plans after this one, was, okay, what do you do for the northern part of the gazebo? Okay, we know we wanted to do the island over it, which you could see from the last drawing, this is what your island looks like now. Okay, 90-degree spaces, broken curb here, there's barrels currently here, but you have basically a straight shot here. EV charging stations, you have conduit, you have lighting, there's utilities that run right down the middle of that center island as provided by staff. So again, another reason to be careful what we put there. But looking at all the different scenarios and knowing that trying to factor in the civic space, trying to factor in the Manville Road finished product, which will be a straight left lane, right? And then a right turn only lane with no slip lane over here. Okay, what are the different design alternatives? And I could kind of walk the board through that here. There is, I don't want to kill you with the engineering dimensions, so we don't have to focus on that. But there's basically alternative 1. Continue the angle parking in the northern median, and then also introduce angle parking on the west side in front of the post office and Starbucks. Let me go back to the other plan, just for clarity, right? So you currently have parallel parking spaces here. You have 6, and then with the angle parking now, you actually have a net, I believe, a net increase. Net 3 in that area if the board was to pursue the angle parking in that area. Again, between the public passageway, striped islands here currently, and then you have 9 proposed angle parking spaces with another striped island that stays a pretty good distance, maybe about 15, 20 feet up from the future crosswalk that will be part of the Manville Road project and also tie into the Memorial Plaza Civic Space project. So again, you have angle parking down here, you have angle parking down there. I'm not going to sell it either way. It's really for Eric and Mayor and your board's purview to decide what fits best there, but you would have angle parking on both sides. Angle parking does prevent, and they do say it's safer. Studies have shown that too. With parallel parking too, you tend to get stacking, right? So if you have a few spaces that are occupied, and someone's trying to park in the middle space, they're not a great parker. Now they're going in and out. People are getting mad and they're going around. You have a little bit more of conflicting movements, as they call it, with the parallel parking scenario. With an angle parking scenario, you basically
It
mirror.
turns out if you put on your hazard flashers, you're allowed to park wherever you
Exactly.
want. It's a signal that means you shouldn't do this, but it's not the law, so it's okay.
Right. So,
Meanwhile,
right. The intent is there. So you do lose spaces. I will say you do lose a few spaces for the angle parking area. If you do consider 45-degree parking in the northern island, we'll call it, you have a net loss of 3 parking spaces. And I'll circulate these plans afterwards. So there's notes on the side that kind of, tell you what overall this plan here results in an additional 4 parking stalls, even with the net loss here, the net gain.
A net gain of 4 overall.
Yes, Mayor. Yep. Note 7, net gain of 4 in this area, basically from this double yellow line down, because you were going to lose whatever space is up here anyway from the civic space. So just to keep apples to apples, I basically cut that line off right here from this point down.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay. The second alternative, again, for the board's consideration, was the non-angle parking alternative on the other side. So leaving your parallel spaces as is, having only angle parking here, which would be a continuation of what you have down here, good flow, and matching somewhat what's down there, but not touching this area here. So that you get the gist. This size.
So the area in front of the post office and Starbucks in this scenario, the diner remains the existing parallel parking.
Yes, Mayor. Yep. The existing 6 spaces. And under both scenarios, the curb line remains the same on the train station side or on the farmer's market side. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We didn't want to change the aisle up here. And also there's a lot of utilities that run into here. So it was safest and most convenient to not have to relocate lights and conduit wires just to keep that curb line here. There was a lot of good reasons to do that. Here, if you look, this fans out from the existing curb line, which is right about here. So it comes in a little, but that's those are really the 2 options before your mayor, before your board for consideration, but you do maintain 11-foot lanes. This double yellow moves over, kind of like what happened down here, about 7 feet to the east. And then you maintain 2 11-foot lanes. And again, 11-foot lanes aren't strangulating. They're not to the point where people get super nervous. If you moved it down to 10, yes, I think you'd see a lot of nervous drivers because that would be a big shock. I think right now you have anywhere from 13 to 16-foot wide lanes, and now all of a sudden you're necking down to 10. That's a big shock to the system. So this is Eric, Mayor, and Board. This is really the 2 alternatives. So we were looking for direction on if there's any preference, whether you decide to do it tonight. This is kind of in motion already. This southern half.
Uh-huh.
I was just more.
So what was the net gain or loss of the second option?
I believe it was a net of 1 gain. So they both gain stalls, but the second option, we'll call it the parallel space option. This was a net gain of 1. The other plan was a net gain of 4.
Mm-hmm. So, preliminarily, I'm inclined to think we should continue with the angled parking all the way down, so it's consistent the whole way.
Yeah, plus I think just
Agreed.
having a couple of parking spaces in front of the post office instead of 1 is probably a good idea.
Yeah, we gained some parking spaces. I will say, I imagine that some Starbucks patrons who have been in the habit of double parking would regret this because there'll be no place to do it. Arguably, that's from a traffic and pedestrian standpoint, a good thing. A net gain of 4 spaces helps in that regard.
Yeah, it seems like it would help with the pedestrian safety that is being built into that whole area as well, too.
Well, the other thing is it reduces the problem we currently have of people making a big sweeping U-turn.
Yep.
Because in this scenario, that would be a good bit harder to do. I have no doubt somebody will try, but is there a significant argument for alternative 2, do you think, Anthony?
I was bouncing that back and forth. I was looking at different literature and based on what I know and my experience, I would say this plaza really, with the angle parking, you do have a few different traffic calming techniques, right? At some point, hopefully we get the lit crosswalk in there. You have the curb bump out. You have, I'll call them narrowed lanes to 11 feet. You have the angle parking. So it really is a true, you get rid of the slip lane, which is great. And then you get two true lanes over here, well, three, but within two.
Mhm.
Really marry everything together. And I would say that there's no
Mhm.
there's no advantage to having the parallel parking spaces. And at best, it's neutral from an operations standpoint, because you get 10 engineers in here or planning professionals, they might argue the other way. But I'd say at best it's neutral from the operation standpoint, but it's definitely a net gain for the plaza. And it really complements the plaza having the double, the angled parking on both sides. It's no different than Mamaroneck Avenue in the village of Mamaroneck, where I live now for the last 6-7 years. The lanes are a bit wider because they had more real estate and they chose to do it differently back in the 90s. But it works well. I mean, it's smooth. You still have people double parking, but they tend to move for you if they see you go to the car because they want to steal your spot because there's hardly any parking there. They're all filled up. It has been proven angled parking to reduce accidents. It's a clearer direction, easier movements. And
People find it easier to get in and out of.
absolutely. No question.
I will say that the angled parking on the other side between Bedford and the gazebo used to be straight in, and now it's angled. And it's been nothing but an improvement. I think everyone who's come into me has liked it, and my observation is it's been way easier. So,
Yeah,
angled,
Yeah, creates
angled.
fewer blind spots too.
angled.
All right. Excellent. Let me pull up the next item agenda. We can make this Foxwood Wall. Let me stop sharing the screen. I'll circulate this plan afterwards to everybody just so you can digest it. Foxwoods Wall. Okay, so I'm very big into pictures and colors, and it helps me visualize. So
Well, thank you for that. Helps us too.
not assuming that not everybody is a visual learner, but I know pictures worth a million words. So rather than hearing your superintendent or village engineer ramble about top of grade and linear feet, it's good while I'm speaking. At least you could sit and look and kind of get an idea of what the landscape would be. So under the current sidewalk and curb contract that Peter Landy is currently performing, we had money allocated in there under an item called miscellaneous additional work. Eric had indicated the village's priority early on when I first started about doing something for this wall, not the whole wall, because I will tell you the wall in its entirety is about 280 linear feet, right? So when the sidewalk and curb contractor, and that's between Cary Court and Foxwoods. So when the sidewalk and curb contractor went out to the site, he threw rough numbers, and it was in line with what I'd spoken to Eric many months ago about. He said, look, if you want to redo this whole wall, and I'll pull up the kind of give you the visual of what we're looking at here. Let me just share the screen real quick again. Sorry to bounce back and forth. Okay. Cary Court, Campus Drive. This is Google Maps measurement. You're about 300 feet, give or take, right? Measurements may not be exact, but he said for a 300-foot long wall, because that's what we ballparked it at in the field. He said you're looking at about $125,000 to rebuild that whole thing. Now that's may or may not be including the $10,000 to $15,000 that we're going to allocate towards rebuilding a small portion of the wall, i.e. 50 feet. But you get a sense that this is definitely a 6-figure project. Now, most of the stone is actually stored behind this wall. And I know DPW has a number of the stones here at the yard, which we're going to give to the contractor to rebuild the portion of the wall that I'm going to scroll back to in a minute. But I just wanted to give you a visual that it is about 300 feet. It is about $125,000 project to rebuild the wall in place, to an average height of 3 to 4 feet. So let me stop that and go back to this one. Apologize.
And massively more than that to build it to the level of the
Correct.
original wall.
Yeah, I don't see, again, the benefit.
Right.
It's a
Yeah, I
freestanding.
get it.
There's no structural support to it, but we try to hold a line out in the field that made sense, and that line was about 3 feet up from the wall, right? So that's still gives you from the street. You could still see what's behind it. You don't feel like it's towered. It kind of lessens the obviously the presence of the wall, but still gives it a nice aesthetic feature, and also still restores the character of the wall, right? So they're going to clean the stone, they'll rebuild it in place, but this is about 35 feet on this side, so the side to the north of the entryway, right? And about 15 feet here. Now, if we can get more based on where we end up with the sidewalk and curb work, which is almost done, we will certainly try to get more than 50 linear feet. I don't think we'll get much more, maybe another 25. So that's still only 75 feet of the 300 feet, but at least it's a start. It'll be neat. It'll be clean. This is the line that will hold for the new wall. It'll go straight 36 inches up above the ground, go up, connect. There won't be this kind of, if you want to call it vertical stone. And Mayor, to your question, I think a week or two ago, there'll be no capstone. It's not going to be it's concrete. It'll be built with the stones that are there. They'll mortar it nice. You're not going to see mortar in the joints. It's a dry stack wall. So the mortar is stuffed in there, but you won't see it at the surface. So it's going to look true to the character of the existing wall.
Yeah.
So it'll look.
Do we need that path that cuts down behind it alongside the tennis courts?
That path, what I understand from speaking with the building inspector and staff, that path was installed because it was part of their site plan, because I guess there was no.
Because there was no sidewalk when, in the 70s, when Foxwood site plan arose.
Yes, sir. Now
They recently went to the planning commission, I don't know if it's completed, to request decommissioning that sidewalk, that path inside the wall, since there's now a path outside the wall. So I don't know that Foxwood cares about it. Maybe Parks Department cares about it.
yes, from what I understand from park staff, they bring small gators, they bring
Okay.
maintenance equipment to down that path. Absolutely.
All right. That much less wall to build.
Right. So this is a start. Consider the 50 feet. Maybe we'll get to 75, maybe it'll end at 60, but consider it a mock-up of, and I'll tell you, Peter Landy has done a lot of work in Mount Pleasant and Pleasantville back in the day. He's done a lot of work in the village of Mamaroneck when I was there. His masons are exceptional. And if anybody can rebuild this wall back to the way it was and then some, it's certainly the current contractor that we have. So no worries there, but it'll serve as a good mock-up. And if you don't like the height, it used to be 6, now it's 3. It's half. It gives you a line over. But if we have to add another dry stack layer later on because we don't like 3 feet and we want 4 feet, we could always do that.
Okay. Great. I say go.
All right. I'm trying to get through the agenda. I know we're butting up against 8 o'clock. Okay. Con Edison utility pole PD charging station. Let me pull this up real quick. I'm going in order here. Okay, so this was I was working with Eric. Eric had indicated that the police department, mayor, board were interested in another EV charging station in the Wheeler Avenue lot, which is gonna be, let me zoom in because this looks tiny. We all know where the site is, but just to give you Wheeler lot. Okay, senior center is down here, but we were interested in putting another dual EV charging station there. So the little box that you see here, the little red with the 2 little boxes, that's where the charging station would go. There's underground conduit associated with that. This other rectangular box that you see, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, is what you call the pedestal. It's what holds the meter pan, the meter, the conduit, etc. More underground conduit that go to a newly installed, as of today, around 1:00 p.m., a newly installed 45-foot high wooden utility pole that was required by Con Edison as part of this EV Power Ready program. When we met with them in the field and our electrician, PRM Electric, they said, look, we'll give you power, we'll give you overhead service, but we're not coming down our pole through a riser and going underground, which is what we wanted to do originally to this pedestal. They said, we want the pole, but we'll give you 200 amp service. Why that's good is because that kind of future proofs any future EV charging stations there. So 200 amps is more than enough if we want to add a second dual charging station like we did in Memorial Plaza. So we were thinking ahead, and honestly, Con Edison, for whatever reason, our electrician said doesn't give anything less than 200 amp services now. So that actually worked out to our benefit. Had we not gotten 200 amp, we probably couldn't future-proof it for another station. Anyway, one is currently proposed. You have the existing utility pole here, the newly installed. So when Con Edison comes back in a few weeks, they're going to swing a new service from here to here. Before then, our electrician is going to set up the meter pan, the pedestal, everything that holds the meter. DPW is going to dig everywhere where you see UG underground. We're going to trench for them right in the grass. The contractor is going to lay the conduit, the wire. We're going to trench here, and then we're going to set everything up in advance for when I know Bill Patrol's purchasing another charging station over here. That'll be ready for when the charging station arrives. The electrician could hook it up, and then probably by August, September, we should be getting our final inspection from Con Edison, and then shortly after that, 90% reimbursement of probably what's going to amount to about $25,000 to $30,000 worth of expenses. We're going to get 90% of that back, as long as we had done that wooden utility pole. How do we push back on Con Edison and said, no, we want underground electric? They would have said, you know what, you're paying that $15,000, $30,000 and that's 0% reimbursable. So the decision was pretty clear. The pole's in there now. We did not disturb any trees while we were putting this pole in, but I know the question, Eric, that you had asked and it's a good question, was if any trees will be impacted from the installation of these underground conduits. There's 2 trees there, I forget the species, that are very immature. We could certainly be very careful, DPW, when we're digging around those trees to get the conduit in and trying to kind of skew the conduit towards the sidewalk so that we don't disturb the root system. If there are damaged, we will certainly replant whatever trees were damaged. There's only 2 there, so there's nothing more to, we will make every attempt, I assure you, to not damage the root system and preserve the existing trees.
Anthony, I'm having trouble seeing exactly where we are.
It's across the street
You
from
know what?
the
Let me,
park next to the senior center.
Let me do this, yes.
Oh, okay.
Those spaces, those 3 spaces the other way are next to the dumpster behind Lucy's.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
You know what I wanted to do too? I have here, I have the photos from today that I took. Let me just pull these up. And
All right, we're gonna have to cut you off soon, Anthony, because we gotta get to our regular meeting. We
All
can
right.
have you
You know
back next work session if we need to.
We've got another item too, whatever. we
yes, I
do
think we
about
have one more. Okay, Mayor, I'll send you guys the pictures of the pole. That's not a big deal.
ethics.
That's at the end afterwards.
That's the
Yeah,
outreach.
afterwards, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Anthony. And
11
then,
to
just to
midnight.
be clear, this charging station would service, municipal EV vehicles.
The 200 amps, that's enough to do 2 charging stations, enough to do 1 level 3 charging station?
I have to get clarity on that, most likely not a level 3. They do have for fleet charging units, a more powerful version than the one we have out there. So it does, it's a dual station, but does charge quicker.
Because if we can reduce the charge cycle down to like an hour to 80%, then we can eliminate all the remaining police concerns about EVs.
Yeah.
Anthony, we're passing, I hope, a resolution tonight to say that we're working on a climate action plan, which is something I've been working on for a few weeks. So this is good timing, good information.
Excellent.
All right, I thank you for that.
Okay, Mayor, we had 3 items. I don't know what you want me to hit, if anything else. We have the Pleasant Village Estate sidewalks, we have the lighting on Cooley Street, and we have Clark Street drainage. Do you want me to
So
try
I
to
think
run through them?
maybe we come back the next meeting for that,
Okay,
probably. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
good. If Anthony, that works for your schedule, we'll talk.
yeah, absolutely.
You can zoom back. All right, thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony.
Didn't
All
wanna
right,
get too
you're
far
welcome,
behind.
Mayor, you're welcome, board, you're welcome too. Have a good night, and I'll forward you some of these,
Likewise,
this meeting afterwards.
Thank you.
appreciate your good work.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Troy. All right. That's pretty great. Fair amount of water, like for a glass of water or something. Yeah. Okay.
Susan, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Very good. So should I share my screen? I have a hopefully brief presentation.
Sure, the mayor just went to grab some water.
Oh, okay. I'll pull it up and then we can get started whenever everybody's ready.
We have to officially start the meeting as well. I believe.
Sometimes I find it harder to hijack. Failing that, I'm going to fill it up. I'll be right back.
Melissa will,
Fully potable.
I stopped the share. I'll let you guys start.
Sorry. Just give me a minute.
So which month do we not have a regular schedule in the summer?
We don't, we only have 2 per month. We don't have one,
We promote you temporarily for trustee.
we could do a bill pass, during the week.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We just finished our work session. Ready to begin? All right, welcome to the Village Board meeting for the Village of Pleasantville. Today is Monday, May 8th. As is always the case now, you can come visit us at 80 Wheeler Avenue, or you can sign on and watch this meeting as well as meetings of other boards and commissioners via Zoom. You can get the links for the Zoom meetings at pleasantville-ny.gov. Our next regular meeting is 2 weeks from today on Monday, May 22, with a work session at 7 and our regular meeting at 8. So I had a few announcements to make at the outset, and we'll not take too long to do them, but I did not want to miss a couple of important things. Several good things happened this weekend and in the couple of weeks preceding since we last met. One that I wanted to call out was our police chief, Eric Rutzner, was the honoree at the Nicholas Center Gala. The Nicholas Center operates an office here and a training program for people with special needs, and they also run the Spectrum Designs facility, which is at the corner of Martling and Tompkins. Have been great addition to the village, providing great services to folks with special needs. And the Nicholas Center reached out to our police department early in their presence here, and under the direction of Chief Grutzner, he and all of the officers have been very much involved over there, and he was honored this week with a special award, which we are pleased to congratulate him on. Second thing I wanted to report, as many of you who watch regularly know, our longstanding Justice John Curley decided to hang up his spurs after 33 years in the role as our village justice, the first few of them in the role as assistant village justice. John Curley served this village extraordinarily well, and we had an opportunity to honor him in a retirement party that was both a chance to offer well-deserved congratulations to all his work, and it was also a great opportunity to see some folks who came back to honor John on the occasion of his retirement. So it felt like a little bit of a reunion. So thank you, John Curley. He will certainly not recede from view here in the village in his many volunteer activities, but we also welcome John Bukel, our newly elected village justice. Same location the previous night, the Chamber of Commerce honored Peter Lukaj, the owner of Tesoro d'Italia, as the business person of the year. He actually was named the business person of the year for 2019, and COVID intervened and it wasn't possible to have the usual event. So here in 2023, Peter was honored as the business person of the year for 2019, and I suggested that perhaps he was 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, first four-peat winner. I mentioned at one point at a previous meeting that the county URL has changed from westchestergov.com to westchesterny.gov. So if that's a matter of concern, please note it. And then the last thing I wanted to note, on a sad note, but one that honors a life well lived. Billie Jean Sorensen, longtime 50-year resident here in the village of Pleasantville, passed away last week after a long period of illness. She was 94. Billie Jean lived an extraordinary life, more extraordinary than I realized. I went to the memorial service this weekend and was amazed by the many things I didn't know amid the many I did. But Billie Jean was right there at the founding of PCTV and involved for many years at PCTV. She was very involved in the beautification committee. She was very involved in the garden club. She was very involved in the Pleasantville Chamber Music Society. She was involved in all kinds of public service activities and very much involved with Neighbors Link, and the kind of person who put her efforts, her energies, and her high intelligence right on the forefront in service of folks who needed her help, and community programs that could benefit from her assistance. And the amazing piece I never knew is that she grew up in a little bit of a challenged childhood in Texas, and there was really nothing about Billie Jean that seemed like it came from Texas, but she grew up with a very, very interesting life. And I want to say that we were blessed to have her here for all those many years. Likewise, her husband, Harold, who who died a couple of years ago. But their great service to this village isn't going to be soon forgotten. So lastly, let me just run through the quick points about dates coming up. Sunday, May 20 coming up is Pleasantville Day, so please mark your calendars for that. A couple of weeks later, we have the Memorial Day service, which takes place on Memorial Day Monday, which this year is the 29th. Then at the end of that week, the fire department parade is Friday, June 2. And a month or so later, Pleasantville Music Festival, Saturday, July 8. Get thee to pleasantvillemusicfestival.com, buy tickets. You get a little bit of a benefit financially to buy them early, and we encourage you to do so. The lineup is out, all the information is there, so please sign up, please come. Anybody else have anything to pipe up on before we?
Just quickly, I'll say that on Saturday, we had a very successful day. The Climate Smart Task Force was at the recycling center collecting old gas-powered lawn equipment for those who wanted to avail themselves of our rebate program. And a number of people showed up and were able to get money back on new electric equipment. We're going to have another date. It hasn't been scheduled yet, but stay tuned.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? All right, next item on our agenda is Susan Pavate of BFJ Planning is with us remotely. As many of you who watched will recall, Susan presented preliminary results from the study we engaged from BFJ about the potential impacts of residential development in general here in the downtown A1 district. We offered a bunch of comments from the board. There were a bunch of comments from members of the public. We've had a couple of meetings with Eric, and I have had a couple of meetings with Susan in the interim, and she has come back with a revised and expanded memo and is here to describe the results of that in a brief presentation. Welcome, Susan. Can you hear us?
I can hear you all. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clear as a bell.
Very good. I'm going to share and go through this presentation. Can everybody see it now?
Yes,
Great.
we do.
Great. So I'll start a few slides at the beginning or a bit recap just for folks who perhaps weren't at the first meeting, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Let me see if I can advance this. Go this way. So, so the purpose of the study, I think just to follow along with what the mayor was saying, is that, our charge was to really look at what the impact of the 2017 zoning revisions in the A1 district has been in terms of, traffic, school children, utilities, public safety, try to be as quantitative as we can across a number of measures, which I'll speak to, really just to give the village a very clear sense of what development potential is there remaining under these existing regulations, which have been in place since 2017, what that looks like compared with prior to the regulations being enacted, and then does that require or result in the need for any mitigation measures, any changes to the zoning to address concerns that have come from the community regarding these impacts? So in terms of the study methodology, I'm getting a phone call.
All right, hold it. There we go. We're back. Can you hear us, Susan?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
And we can hear you. I don't know what happened there, but one or the other end lost the connection.
Oh, okay.
But we're back and we hear you and we see your screen.
So where did you miss? Should I go back?
Pretty much.
Right after you said Pleasantville.
Slide 2, I think. You were talking about slide 2.
Okay, great. I was very eloquent.
Yeah. That painful thing is it'll never be as good a second time.
So I just wanted to spend a few slides kind of recapping the study, the methodology before getting into the new stuff. So just a refresher for folks joining online as well as the board. The really purpose of this was to get a clear sense for the village of what the development potential is remaining as a result of the 2017 zoning revisions in the A1 district. How that compares with what was in place prior to those 2017 revisions, and whether any changes are needed as a result of the impacts of that development potential regarding public safety, traffic, school children, infrastructure, really just responding to those community concerns. Oh, I just muted myself. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. There were three components to the study's methodology. There's first this build-out analysis, where we worked with the village to identify a total of 10 sites within the A1 district called soft sites. And I'll touch on what those are, but really trying to identify what are the most likely of the sites in the district for potential development. And what does the current development picture look like across those 10 sites versus what was in place prior to 2017? Once we had that as a baseline understanding, what do the impacts look like across these topic areas? So traffic, infrastructure, et cetera. And resulting from those impacts, are there any zoning recommendations that come into play in terms of mitigating those impacts? Okay. So quick overview of the build out analysis. You'll see on the map on this slide, there are a total of 10 slides identified throughout the A1 district that were determined to be the most likely of the total sites in the district that could potentially be subject to development, largely because they are either vacant or underbuilt. And so we kind of zeroed in on those, and particularly looking at sites that either of themselves or in combination with others create a large lot size, development parcel that have some properties in common ownership. Some of these may be known to be on the market. And some of these may have been the subject of prior interest by the property owner. Of these 10, only the 444 Bedford Road is an actual development proposal. We know that site number 10 on Washington Avenue, there has been some interest indicated in the past by the property owner. All of the others are really just identified because of their size, because of the common ownership, various factors, but they are not actual development proposals. And that's an important point to make. I think, there is a sense that a lot of development has happened in the last 10 years. But I would say with each development that occurs, additional development is actually more difficult because property becomes more expensive. There are fewer properties remaining that are significant in terms of their size that could accommodate a large development. So it's almost like the easy ones get picked off first, and then what's left becomes a little bit trickier. But we did identify these 10 sites as a means to look at the impacts of the zoning changes. Okay. So, in any build out analysis or zoning analysis, you want to use consistent assumptions across the board. So we use the same development pattern across these 10 sites, the same bedroom mix. We looked at what those factors looked like across the 10 sites. We looked at parking in a sense to calculate the requirements based on the development that could happen on those sites. So we had a sense of what the requirements were, but we did not assume that that was a constraint necessarily. So we kind of took note of it, but did not take any properties off the table because of the parking issues. And I'll talk about that in a couple slides. Our basic approach was to max out development, putting our developer hat on, trying to get as much development as we possibly could on each of these sites, and do that both pre-2017 and based on the current zoning. So for pre-17, the main development constraint was the graduated land area requirements that were in place prior to 2017. There were, a minimum land area requirement per unit. And it varied according to the bedroom mix. And so that really did limit the development potential. So once we understood that, then you could get the allowable area, you get building footprint, total size, and that leads to the number of units. The current zoning, really the development constraints are what is allowable using FAR bonuses. So we assume that you would max those out to the greatest extent possible without exceeding other zoning requirements. We did find that in most cases of the soft sites, they could not achieve the total FAR bonus without exceeding another zoning requirement, coverage typically, another factor that's part of the zoning. So in that sense, when that happened in those cases, we did not assume the maximum FAR. We basically took it as far as they could without exceeding anything else. And that generally resulted in sites achieving somewhere between 2.3 and 2.5. If you recall, 2.0 is the base FAR allowable, which has been allowable for many, many years. We found that the smaller the sites were, the more difficult it was for them to achieve those FAR bonuses. And they tended to really be capped at that 2.0 because otherwise they would exceed something else. So we looked at that across those 10 sites. And this is not a new slide. These numbers are the same as before. This just shows you kind of the summary results of that. So before 2017, these 10 sites under their maximum development potential, we determined it was 178 units. And you see the other factors, almost 197,000 square feet of residential area and additional area for non-residential. Under the current zoning, these numbers you see in the middle column, that comes out to 430 total units and corresponding building areas. So the net difference there is 252 units. So that was what we kind of started with and we presented to you all back in March. As I mentioned the last time we met, and I've touched on it already in this presentation, we do believe that the build out analysis has been highly conservative. As I noted, none of these sites are actual development proposals except for 444 Bedford. Most of them do require some level of assemblage. There's not a single other than 444 Bedford and the one on Washington Avenue. All of the others have more than one owner involved. So they would have to be assembled in some way. Not all the properties necessarily are available. We did assume that every site is developed to its absolute maximum. Using all those available bonuses, but what we know is that not every development that has actually occurred has even availed themselves of all of the bonuses. So that's a very aggressive development assumption that they would be able to max everything out. And that really comes into play when you look at parking. I mentioned that we did have a sense of how these sites were able to park or not park. Under the pre-2017 zoning, generally the sites could accommodate parking on site. But once they were able to use bonuses under the current zoning, if they were to max those out, none of them could be developed without some form of structured parking. And that may be feasible on larger sites. I mean, you've certainly seen it on the 444 Bedford proposal. They have structured parking proposed. And there may be other of the larger properties that could accommodate and where it would make financial sense. On the smaller properties, we don't think that structured parking is likely to pencil out for those developers. So we think that that's going to be a real constraint on development, but we didn't assume that constraint in the build out analysis. Another factor is that there actually are residential units that exist across these 10 sites. There are a total of 20 currently in place, occupied. We did not factor those into the analysis. We didn't take them, we didn't net them out. So we assumed that there's sort of nothing there now. So all of the new residential development is starting from zero essentially, and that's not the case. And then lastly, we do find that full development and any kind of a build out analysis, particularly one that has as many sites as this 10, the actual development of those sites can take many, many years. It often fluctuates highly when you have market swings like we're kind of having right now. So it's not like you flip a switch and in 2 years you have a fully developed downtown. So all of these are factors that led us to really assume that this was very conservative. And we wanted to take an incremental approach, which we touched on this back in March. We assumed that not a full amount of the build out would be constructed in the next 10 years. We assumed up to 25%, about a quarter. And that's typical with experience that we've seen elsewhere in Westchester. So if you recall, that resulted in what we would call the incremental build out of up to 63 units. And that was the basis for all the impact analysis that we previously presented. We did get pushback on that from the public, members of the public. And I know we talked about that a lot when we met back in March. I think folks felt like, look, we've already seen a lot of development. That seems awfully low, given how much interest the village has seen. So we talked about that, as the mayor mentioned. And we decided, well, we can be even more conservative, based on the experience of the village in the last 10 years. So we essentially doubled the incremental build out assumption to 50%. And so that doubles that 63 units to 126. We also looked at, and I'll touch on it in the next few slides, other recent development that has occurred, either still under construction or recently built and occupied or not occupied yet. We looked at adding those developments in as well. Now, I will caution that those other developments, which I'll discuss, have all experienced their own seeker review. They've all gone through that. The village has assessed the impacts of these developments, but we wanted to kind of pull them into, a holistic picture to be looking at the entire development picture. Okay, so those additional projects, and these should be familiar to you. Several of them are fully built. 98 Washington is built, but has not been occupied at this point. And then the next two on Washington, 101 and 39, those are fully built, fully occupied for several years now. And then the last two, 70 Memorial and 52 Depew, are still under construction. Memorial Plaza is under construction. Depew is not fully leased yet, but getting there. So, I'll talk about these projects and kind of how they're factored in. I will say some of them that have actually already been on the market and online for a few years, they're already affecting things. And I'll make clear where that happens. For example, school children have already been coming out of some of these developments. So you don't want to kind of double count them, but I'll go through that. And in addition to these 5 projects that total 204 units, we looked at 2 other development sites in the village that there are no formal proposals for these 2 sites, but we looked at, well, what else could possibly occur? So there is the village-owned parking lot on Cooley Street. There has been some, informal discussion about a potential office building on that property. So we looked at that. That is village-owned property, so they would have to, have some kind of an agreement with the developer. They certainly have full control of that since it's publicly owned. And our understanding of the informal proposal is that it would require either a parking variance or a waiver by the Planning Commission. It's not an as-of-right development.
And then the issue there, just to clarify, it would be 3 stories of office.
Yeah.
The 4th story would be the first floor, which would be parking, which would be given back to the village. And the parking variance would require the zoning board to permit the parking for the office to be handled on a valet basis in the parking lot at 70 Memorial.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So an interesting proposal, but not one that can be done without, some kind of a variance or waiver. And then the second potential site is the former Bank of New York site on Campus Drive, and portion of the former Manville estate as well. That is partially in the residential district, and that's where you could get 8 single-family homes we previously determined for the village. And then the other portion of the site is in the campus office district. We looked at if you were to have development similar to what's surrounding between Toll Brothers and the other surrounding developments, you could get 80 townhouses on that property. Again, there is no formal proposal for that. I don't even think an informal proposal has been put out. And that would require on the campus office portion a rezoning to allow townhouses. They are not currently allowed. So again, pretty speculative, but we're just trying to be very conservative and think about what could potentially occur. And that's not in the A1 district in any case. So it's not totally affected by the zoning provisions, but it's just something to think about in terms of overall development impacts. Okay, so when you look at that, this is a big giant table. I'll just summarize it. For traffic, we previously in the prior memo and the prior discussion, we included all of 10 of the build out sites. So that was the one area of impacts that already was pretty maxed out. We looked at all 10 of them, traffic resulting from all 10, because it's really difficult not to look at the entire picture from a traffic locational perspective. You'd have to figure out which sites might get developed, and we really, you don't really know. So we looked at the entire picture previously, and that's that middle portion, the build out analysis soft sites. We added to those sites the top portion, those 5 approved development sites. Again, they've already been approved. They've already been analyzed under seeker. We used the traffic generation previously looked at under seeker for those sites. So we added those in, and then we added the 2 other potential development sites, which I just talked about, the Cooley Street office building and the Campus Drive development. Again, both of those are not formal development sites, and neither could occur as of right. So the total impact of that from a traffic perspective is just under 262 additional trips in the peak hour. Now, the peak hour is when you look at any one site. So if you've ever seen a traffic study for a particular development, they determine what the peak hour for that site is. And it really is just when the most traffic occurs at that site. So a peak hour is not necessarily the same at every site. Some sites might experience the peak hour in the morning peak, and maybe that's because they're closer to a school, for example. Or some sites might experience it in the evening if they're perhaps closer to a highway where there's more commutation. So when you look at the peak hour generation in that right-hand column, 262, it's not necessarily all happening in the same hour, but that would be sort of a worst case, looking at that as if it occurred in 1 hour. So that's kind of what you look. Yes.
So sorry, so the peak hour is not determined by, when cars, let's say it's an apartment building, are likely to be going in and out of that particular building. It's determined by the greatest amount of traffic in the surrounding area.
It's determined by the generation of that use. So yes, in terms of an apartment building, but it's also determined by where the intersection actually is. So what's happening at that intersection, just from a baseline.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It's striking to me also that the highest figures are for these two theoretical developments, one of which is an office building, which tends to generate more traffic, right? And then
right.
The one that is not currently zoned. Anyway, that's just a parenthetical remark.
Yeah, no, that's true, that the traffic generation rates for single family homes, office, and townhouses are all higher than multifamily. And this comes from the Institute of Traffic Engineers. So it's all standardized data.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we previously discussed this. We did look at the 2019 DOT numbers, which were the last ones collected at specific locations in the downtown. And we were glad that they were 2019 because it predates COVID, which is nice to see. And we compared those with the numbers that we had previously looked at when the zoning changes occurred. So we did the seeker for the village on that. And we had looked at traffic as of 2017. At the time of 2017, we didn't have data for Wheeler. I think since then, DOT's collected it. But what we did find is in that 2-year period, traffic actually fell, except for Manville Road, where it was up slightly, but it fell on Bedford Road and Marble Avenue, which was interesting. And we suspect, although we don't have current counts, I think the village might be looking at those or the DOT will be getting them soon. We suspect the traffic is down because of COVID and because of the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. We know that traffic, it's not necessarily that it's always down. And in some cases, it might be more during the day when people are perhaps at home, they're working from home, they're not commuting. But from a commutation standpoint, which typically corresponds to either the morning or the evening peak hour, we think it's probably down because many people are still not back in the office. So that 2019 was probably a fairly high level mark. So based on that and based on the fact that we think this is still a very conservative traffic analysis, we do think that it's something in that peak hour that the village could handle. And the reason for that is these 4 factors. So, not factored into the traffic analysis is the fact that all of these sites had previous development on them, whether it's the ones that are either built or under construction or it's the soft sites. There are no soft sites that are on vacant land. So they're already generating some level of traffic now. Now, clearly that would be different if they were developed into multifamily, but it's not necessarily starting from zero. And then we think that the 2019 numbers actually did count some of these developments. So the ones that have been already constructed and occupied at some level, we think it's been a few years for a couple of them, so they were probably already counted, but we're assuming that they weren't in this analysis. And then on the office, Nicole, which you mentioned, the trip generation, it's fairly high because the ITE doesn't really have data or category for office that's sort of a TOD type office. This particular location is quite walkable to the train station. So, we think it's likely it would actually have a lower trip generation, but we don't really have that data. So it's kind of the same trip generation as if it were a very suburban office park type use that everyone had to drive to.
Sorry,
Um,
TOD is transit oriented development?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. And then lastly, I mentioned that, that the DOT counts do predate the pandemic numbers. So, we do find across the region that commuter traffic is down. So we think that the actual trip generation, because of these conservative assumptions, is probably lower. And it's being added to a lower volume than 2019, if that makes sense.
What, can I ask a sort of naive question about traffic? One of the difficulties with traffic is determining what the cause is, right? And my suspicion based on a number of factors is that a lot of the traffic we've been seeing recently is through traffic. I don't know exactly what's generating that, whether it's work related or recreation related or what is there. I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question. Are there studies that try and factor those kinds of things into them, or is that just something that one can only determine kind of anecdotally?
There are studies done by more in-depth traffic folks than I. Traffic engineers do these types of studies, like looking at origins and destinations and turning movements in particular, and they can make assumptions about where people are going. And yes, you can sort of capture what's through traffic and what is actually coming to and from Pleasantville. So
At least
it goes beyond these numbers.
And in broad strokes, we depend on the DOT numbers that they count at Manville, Bedford, Marble. Probably Wheeler is not much cut through traffic, obviously cut through local, but certainly we've always had a significant number of east-west travelers,
Right.
and had way more of them during the time period when the sawmill was partly out of commission.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So that's traffic. So school children, we previously did this analysis using the Rutgers numbers, the multipliers, which are standard in the industry. If you recall, we used the 63 units, which was the top end of the incremental build out. Now we have doubled that. 126 is sort of the baseline for the analysis. And the key factors, as a reminder, that really drive the generation of school children are the bedroom mix. Obviously, the more bedrooms you have in a unit, the more kids you're going to generate. And that's why single family homes tend to generate more than apartments. The type of apartment matters, whether it's low rise, mid rise, or high rise. And then the income matters, whether it's market rate or affordable. So those are kind of the three big inputs. So for the assumptions, and this slide has not changed in terms of the assumptions from the prior analysis. For this build out, we assumed low rise, which is 3 or 4 stories, because that's what's allowed under the zoning. We assumed that they were market rate, so over 100,000 annual income, except for the 10% affordable units, which are required. And that does increase, that results in a higher number of generation of children, school children, just based on the data. So what we did actually, to be even more conservative than assuming a higher rate for affordable units, is we actually then increased the affordable generation even more by 50%, just again to be quite conservative about generation of school children. Okay, so what this found based on that 126 incremental build out was a total of 16 children. There are just under 7 coming out of the multifamily units, and then just under 9 coming out of the affordable units. If you recall, under the prior analysis, it was 9 total kids. So not quite double when you factor in all the rounding and everything into that analysis. So the 16 was kind of the output of that. So then, as we did before, we tested that with the actual experience of Pleasantville, these 3 developments that have come online in the last 10 years, and how many kids have come out of those. Toll Brothers is not a comp for the apartments in the A1, but the other 2 are 39 and 101 Washington. And so we used the higher of those 2, 101 Washington, and that results in a sort of a local multiplier of 0.14. When we kind of plug that into the analysis, 126 units, that gives you 18 public school children. So pretty close, right, to the 16. So then we use that higher 18 when we sort of added.
And worth noting, I think that the school child generation by Toll Brothers was roughly the same as what was predicted in the demographic studies way back when. And kind of interesting to note that, those units are all large enough to accommodate a family, but there are 25 school children, some of them at the high school age, in 67 units. So
Right. Yep. Yeah, they came in pretty well on track.
right.
Okay. So we took that build out analysis, the 18 kids, you see that kind of in the middle of the table, the build out analysis soft sites. We added that to the development sites kind of in the pipeline that have not yet been occupied. So that's 98 Washington, 70 Memorial, and 52 Depew. Those three we calculated would result in 25 new school children. And then we added the two, well, not the two, one is an office, it doesn't have kids, but we added the Campus Drive Mandeville Road site, just again, speculative, the 8 single family homes, 80 townhomes, that results in 37 children. So the total then results in 80 kids. So almost half of that is coming out of the Mandeville Campus Drive Mandeville Road site, which again is entirely speculative. The 25
and not
units.
permitted under current zoning.
Exactly. And so the village exercises a great deal of control over what happens on that property. So again, you look at it's 18 units for the build out, it's 25 for the other 3 sites that are sort of already happening or already under construction or built. And the total then is 80 kids. Sort of worst case. So again, this slide is not new either. It's looking at what's happening in the actual enrollment in the Pleasantville School District. As I mentioned last time, it is down from the high of in 2013, 10 years ago. It's down just over 100 kids across the district, and that is expected to continue to decline. In some grade levels more than others, but on an overall basis, that decline is projected to continue. So when you look at what's happening overall in the district, we think sort of a worst case of 80 kids is not going to be a significant negative impact for the school district. Okay. So utilities, water and sewer. Again, these kind of go hand in hand. When you look at water and sewer, we use the water demand for the analysis because sort of what goes in comes out. That's how engineers look at it. So we really look at it from a water demand perspective. And as we did with the build out analysis, we use a consistent bedroom mix. It's based on the number of units. For the commercial analysis, we use a very much worst case, very conservative assumption. We're assuming that these commercial uses are either restaurants or salons, hair salons, both of which have a very high use of water. So it is, again, very worst case. And the demand for those are based on state standards, and it's based for restaurants on number of seats and for hair salons, the number of washing stations. Okay. So this is another big table, but what it shows you is that we've got at the top third of the table, it's the 126 units now, which is double the prior 63. So that would generate about 22,000 gallons per day of water demand. When you look at the restaurant program, that's part of that build out. So the ground floor typically, and then the hair salon, also the ground floor, sort of 50-50, we assume that split. That has now also sort of doubled, right? The restaurant and commercial programs. So that's 24,000, just over that for restaurants, almost 18,000 gallons per day for the hair salon. And so that brings you to a total of just under 64,000 gallons per day of water demand. Now, if you look at that 688 seats for restaurants and almost 90 individual washing stations, that's a lot. So that's clearly a maximum number. Yes.
Susan, can I ask how realistic is it that there's going to be a restaurant in these buildings? Because I feel like we're talking about residential buildings, right?
Well, we assume that most would be mixed use, and that's
right.
That's in part because in order to use a lot of those bonuses, you've got to have an active ground floor.
Yeah, and yes, I understand, and there's likely to be some kind of commercial use. I'm just wondering, because I'm curious, with some of our new development, what is likely to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I think we all have our ideas about what the ideal commercial use would be.
Well, it's difficult, obviously, to predict. When you're looking at 10 total sites, what's going to go on the ground floor of each one. And certainly standard retail would generate a lot less water demand because you'd likely have one bathroom. And
no, I'm just wondering if in a residential building, if if they're, well, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm thinking of sort of older buildings, but, that a restaurant would be possibly discouraged because of people living above
Well,
it.
I mean,
but I don't know.
At
Just
least we've got a
question.
worst case scenario here. The
Yeah,
demand
yeah.
for water wouldn't be
Wouldn't be,
any more than
greater.
this, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that was really the goal.
yeah,
Clearly retail could also happen, any number of stores.
and it would be less.
It would be
right.
less.
And-
It would be
Yeah,
less.
okay, point taken.
And that's why I wanted to make the point. I mean, 688 seats, that's a lot of restaurants.
Right,
So
right.
in all likelihood, it would not, clearly it would not be all restaurant and salons. It would be
All
other
of Pleasantville would have
uses.
to eat out every night.
Every night. Right. But again, that's very much worst case. So then we added that build out for worst case scenario. We looked at, if you recall, back in 2021, we had done a water demand analysis for the village that looked at prospective projects, which included a lot of the ones that we've been talking about. A lot of those, 70 Memorial, 52 Depew, the ones on Washington. It looked at all of those, as well as the Campus Drive development. So when we added those in, at least the ones that were not yet built, because the ones that have been built for a few years and occupied, they're already in your current consumption, right? So we don't want to double count those. But the ones that are still not, fully on board, we added those in. So that is the middle portion, that projected water consumption from known and potential projects in the pipeline. So that, in addition to the ones that we previously looked at in 2021 that have not yet come online, that also includes the Cooley Street office building, and the townhouses at Campus Drive. Again, both of those require rezoning or variances. We added that to the incremental build out analysis, and then we added that to what your current median historical consumption is. We got that data from the village. We updated it from 2021, so it really is as current as it could be. And the total of all of that is 27.38 million gallons per month. When you look at that as a combined basis. Okay, and as you all know, your water comes from New York City DEP. They monitor your water allocation and give you a certain amount, which is based on your population, and they update that every 10 years. So, we had previously in 2021 looked at what your allocations clearly were in 2020. That's an actual allocation, and then 2030 and beyond, it's projected based on your population projections. So that 27.38 million gallons per month comes in right under the 2020 allocation, which is going to govern you for the next 10 years until 2030. So we think it's something that can be met through 2030. As you all know, you already exceed your allocation often during summer months when demand is higher than other months of the year. And it's not that your water gets turned off, it's just that the village has to pay for that. So we really don't think that this potential build out really changes the water picture very much. We previously noted back in 2021 that there are mitigation strategies that the village can undertake to maybe give a little bit more flexibility on its water allocation. And we would continue to recommend that.
Related but unrelated, we're in the midst of a substantial study about our water system, water rates,
That's correct.
thinking forward to the replacement of the tanks, all kinds of factors.
Yeah. It's a bigger picture. And we think that it doesn't really get changed by these numbers on the build out. So then the last few areas, we looked at public safety. And here we factored in the 126 units as opposed to 63. So it does result in, additional calls. But when you look at how much they've fluctuated year to year, they're actually lower currently than they have been in many years in terms of the police calls. So we feel that this 14%, which is kind of a totally maximum potential from 126 units, we think that that's something that the police department can handle because it has handled those types of fluctuations year to year in the past. Okay. And similarly with fire, we've again factored in that 126 units. When we use the percentages that had been previously calculated, we estimate that would generate about 7 additional calls, those 126 units. And that's something that the fire department, we think, can clearly handle. It's just as part of its everyday or our annual fluctuations. And then lastly, on the ambulance corps, we again, factoring in the higher number, we estimate that would have, the 126 units would have about an effect of about 20 calls a year, in addition to the baseline. And again, that's something that can be accommodated. It's not going to really hit them very hard, more than they've already kind of experienced year to year. Okay. And then lastly, I'm not going to dwell too much on fiscal impacts because, I think they're positive, and that's something that we've seen, and we previously talked about this. This is a model that is from the National Association of Home Builders. So it's a nationwide model. It's not terribly localized. That's why I'm not going to totally dwell on it, but it does show that, when you look at these market rate units, not factoring in the affordables, 297 units is the sort of 90% of those units for the build out. It does generate additional, local income, employment income, wages and salaries, taxes, all of these positive economic factors, both, in the first year and then annually recurring, which really are seen as offsetting some of the, the demands on the local services. That's essentially why you have these tax factors in here, is to mitigate some of those demands on your local services. So it's positive. It's more positive when you look at 126 units versus 63. And so we do think that can offset any additional impact on your local public services, public safety, et cetera. Okay. So just a couple more slides and then I'll stop sharing and answer questions. So when we added in the additional units, really from the incremental build out analysis, as well as those other sites, we still don't think that it creates a significant adverse impact when you look at these factors in terms of traffic, schools, utilities, or public safety. It's clearly more than if it were 63. I don't want to say that it's not. It's going to create more traffic, generate more school children, have greater impact on all of these. But we don't think that any of that rises to the level of significance that would require significant mitigation or significant completely new zoning. But as we noted before, we know that there are community concerns that maybe have less to do with some of these concrete impacts and more to do with just the general aesthetics and scale. We know that there have been a lot of concerns about how some of these developments look, how they feel when you look at them in the context of existing development. And those can't really be captured in these kind of quantitative analyses. So we do think that the village can consider dialing back perhaps some of these zoning provisions that were done in 2017, and that there are ways to really control some of those aesthetic, considerations. So just some final recommendations. We do think a lot of these FAR bonuses can be either reduced or eliminated. We find that a lot of them have not, totally been utilized. There's only 70 Memorial used all of them. 444 is proposing to use some of the bonuses, but not all. So we do think you can actually dial those back, reduce some of the development potential across the board. It would not necessarily eliminate development potential, but it would reduce the scale. And we have.
Can I ask a question about one of those? So
Yes.
The first one, so would that affect at all the motivation in the case where there was a development to do something with the adjacent land? So for instance, I'm thinking of the walkway that 70 Memorial Plaza developed.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that related, or am I misconstruing what that's? Yeah.
That was the sort of little public open space that's right next to their building and the walkway.
Right.
They did that because they were it's municipal land, but they were able to count it toward their FAR in exchange for agreeing to maintain it. So yes, that was a direct benefit that was received at that site as part of their bonuses. I don't think that situation is really common or maybe even occurring elsewhere in the A1. Yes. So it's not really something that we think is relevant to most properties.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep. Okay. And then the second bonus is that one that requires, active ground level uses. That really should be something that's being done and promoted anyway as part of zoning. It's almost like, do you really want to give them additional bonus for something that should be done already? we do think that the land area per unit requirement that was in place prior to 2017, that was the primary limiting factor that was not allowing properties to achieve their allowable FAR. So we do think if you eliminated that, you don't really need bonuses. You really could, you could address that, and then properties could actually achieve their 2.0 FAR. And then the last one is when you're looking at design guidelines. So there were design guidelines put into place in 2017. We do think that they could use some work, some tweaks and some revisions. And you could consider either eliminating that bonus for meeting the design guidelines if you feel that they're not meaty enough, or you keep the bonus but make them more stringent and something that is more comprehensive and perhaps a little bit more challenging to meet in exchange for giving that bonus. So that last bullet, I think, is the area that or the element that probably has the most potential to affect the aesthetics, the design, the scale of new development in the downtown. Okay. So I think this is the last slide. We did look at, well, what would happen across these build out sites if you did eliminate these bonuses? You eliminated the land area requirement, which is that main development constraint. You eliminated all FAR bonuses, but you kept the 2.0 FAR, which has been on Pleasantville's books for many, many years, prior to 2017 even. So when we looked at that across the board, again, that pre-2017 zoning development potential for these build-out sites was 178. Under the current zoning, we calculated it at 430. If you dialed back those bonuses or eliminated a lot of them, what you would get would be 376. So obviously more than existed prior to 2017, but certainly less than could happen under current zoning. Okay, and again, this is maxing out as much as possible across every site. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I'm going to stop sharing.
I thank you for all of that, Susan. Let me add one more piece that I've reported on along the way during this legislative session. As folks who followed this are aware, the New York State budget was passed last week, and all of the housing proposals that had been proposed by Governor Hochul were eliminated in the budget that was passed. So none of them ended up appearing in the budget. Which honestly was a surprise to many of us who've been closely involved in discussing it. We vigorously opposed a number of aspects of it, which would have been highly problematic for us and many of our colleagues. I did not expect that the result of this would be that the whole thing was thrown out to fight another day. But I do think it's clear that that's what happened, and the issue certainly hasn't gone away. There remains the possibility of some of these matters being taken up as legislative items in the remaining couple of months of the legislative session, not even a couple of months, 1 month at this point. But I think there is no question that the issue of state efforts to encourage housing development is going to reappear in some form. And I know from conversations with you and reading in elsewhere that that's the case in New Jersey and Connecticut as well, right? So obviously none of us can predict what will happen, but it's my sense, and see if you agree, that we will be in this discussion for the coming few years about the regional need to develop more housing.
Absolutely. It's something that it is not unique to Pleasantville. As you said, Mayor, there were many communities that were opposing these budget proposals throughout Westchester and the whole region, really, on Long Island too, because they're all facing what you're facing. But the fact that it didn't make the budget does not mean that the issue goes away. And particularly when you're looking at what your neighboring states have already done and are doing. Connecticut is very active now. New Jersey has had requirements for many years. So New York is not going to just ignore that forever. So it's not going away. And that's one reason why we would not suggest going below the 2.0 FAR that has been your regulations for years. 2.0 is appropriate for a downtown of Pleasantville's type. We see that really in many villages and towns and cities that have walkable downtowns with train stations like you all have. It's an appropriate density and appropriate scale. It's really kind of how you make it happen. and how that development looks and fits in with the context.
So I have a question. One of the issues that came up during the discussion of housing development was, the thing that Peter alluded to, the lack of affordable housing. While we have a requirement for affordable set aside, it is 10%. And one of the things that is within our power is to change that. How would we assess the impact of moving that to something like 15%?
That is something that you would have to study in addition to just looking at land area and zoning allowances, which is what we did. You'd have to bring economics into play. It would be a more significant study. I'd have to give some thought as to what that would entail. But it would need to look at, what does that do to the market? Now, 15% is not, it's not out of the realm of possibility. In New Jersey, the standard has become 20% for many, actually pretty much all communities. This was done out through the courts, lots of lawsuits. That's become kind of the standard. But even before that, 15% was the standard. So, 10%.
15% affordable at 80% of the average median income. Was that the threshold in New Jersey?
Yeah, although now they've got, it's very regulated. If you know anything about New Jersey, it's the only state where it's a constitutional right to have affordable housing. So they actually require minimum percentages for very low income, which is 30%, low income, which is 50%, as well as 80%. They have requirements on bedroom
in every
mix
community.
in every community.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
So it's a different landscape than New York and Connecticut, but Connecticut is starting to move a little bit in that direction, and that's why you're seeing New York move in that direction too. So to answer your question, you certainly have it in your power to increase the affordable set aside. I think you'd want to start looking at the economics as well. It would certainly, it would probably reduce the viability of development on some sites, particularly the small ones, if the developers can't make that pencil out. But without doing further analysis, I couldn't speculate as to what it would do kind of across the board.
So tell me if my sense of this is correct, Susan, in conversations with colleagues around Westchester and some elsewhere in New York State, it is by and large way more possible to develop affordable housing, especially at the lower AMI rates, where it depends upon a lower capital investment, when you can provide surface parking as opposed to the possibility of having to provide structured parking.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the case even if it's market rate.
And then alternative argument that comes up in that discussion is the idea that downtown housing potentially doesn't need a parking requirement, that in an area where folks could depend on mass transit, perhaps they wouldn't have a car. And that, of course, varies widely depending on the locale and what you can get to using what public transit.
Yeah. You have to really assess, I would say, the location in terms of the municipality, the train station, but also the site itself. I was actually out on Long Island today in a community that has a train station and a new transit-oriented development right next to the train station. They made the developer land bank some spaces just in case. And a couple years after it was built, they made them put parking in that space because they were finding that it was spilling over, that people were parking off site because they couldn't park on site. So you have to really be careful and look at it. That being said, we do find that transit oriented development sites tend to generate, less parking demand.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What that is, you have to calculate it.
Yeah, you showed the numbers, for example, for 39 Washington, and perhaps it'd be worth at some point validating what's actually happening on it. My guess is that those numbers are higher than what's actually happened there.
Right. Yeah, and you have to really calibrate it with the data. You certainly don't want to build parking that's going to sit empty, right? But you don't want to create a parking issue that's spilling over onto your downtown streets. So it's something you've got to carefully look at. And there is a lot of data out there from the region looking at TODs and the experience of comparable communities. So
And
that's
people-
what
And
developers
the
do when
world
they
keeps
come in.
changing around us. People's
It does.
behavior keeps changing. I mean, it's funny, I walked across Memorial Plaza this morning at 8 a.m. And 3/4 of the parking spaces were empty.
Mhm. Mhm.
A few years back at 8 a.m., no spaces would be empty, so.
Right.
And yet walk across Memorial Plaza at 4 in the afternoon and it's packed. So
Right.
And also, when we're talking about transit-oriented development here, it's all based around the Metro North because our county bus system has not in any way met the demands to move east or west or to even, to move point to point in the same region. And on the weekends, the service drops to a trickle. So it's pretty unrealistic to have someone living in northern Westchester without a car who's going to get to do all their errands and their doctor's appointments, things like that.
Mhm.
It's just-
I would agree, yes,
until the bus, unless and until the bus system dramatically changes.
Yeah,
which I don't think is imaginable anytime soon.
Or until automated vehicles, so autonomous vehicles come and can be shared.
yeah, we don't need our own cars anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But that's a ways down the road.
yeah, we're not quite there yet.
No pun intended. Any other questions?
So I had one question, Susan. I was reading around about scenic view districts as a zoning category. Are you familiar with any? I know these existed in New York City since 1974. I learned, and they exist in many other cities, including the one that I was born and raised in, which is how I knew about them. Do you know of those existing in Westchester that municipalities have used for for special zoning designations?
Yeah, I know some of the Hudson River communities, I think on both sides actually have some scenic view districts. Particularly those that have local waterfront revitalization programs, LWRPs. And there they actually identify specific views that are protected. They need to be public views. So the state doesn't look very favorably on private views. So
Of course, yeah.
Things like the view from a downtown street at the top of a hill, to the river, that kind of thing. So that's something that I have seen. I wouldn't say that it drastically decreases development potential, but it can control the type of development and certainly protecting those specific views. But you have to kind of document them, you have to identify them and then look at the specific impacts to them.
Right. So, yeah, without getting into the details, because it's a very nascent idea, but one of the things that I've been hearing over and over from residents of Pleasantville about the development is the feeling that they're starting to feel surrounded by a built environment. There are fears that they might feel surrounded by a built environment when they had a more harmonious relationship before with the natural world and the horizon. And so it's just something I want to, not for deciding or discussion necessarily tonight, but I just wanted to ask you if you know of examples, and the waterfront ones certainly make a lot of sense.
Yeah, we've usually seen them where then the buildings have to be set back and upper stories have to be stepped back even more to preserve those views. I mean, you can also achieve the same thing with great design guidelines. So you can do things like require upper floors or top stories to be set back from the rest of the facade. That increases sort of light and air. So that can address some of that feeling of being kind of hemmed in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Susan, if you're up for it, we have two members of the audience. I don't know if either of them care to ask a question, but we've got former Mayor Bernie Gordon and former Chair of the Planning Commission, and also Tom Rooney, who's been very involved. Do you guys have anything you wanted to ask? Welcome, Tom Rooney.
Thank you. Just a quick, not a question, but in a recent article in the local newspaper, it said that this study, the first time, showed little impact to the village, and put out a percentage of like 7% increase. but that wasn't based on that was based on the 2B, like the 444 project, and it didn't take into consideration the that in round numbers, 200 apartments that have yet to be occupied fully yet. And if you use the numbers that they came up with to get the 7%, if you use all the apartments, we would be up to about 25%, which of course would be a huge increase and strain on the village and everything else.
A 25% increase in population?
No, it was, oh, well, yeah, yes. When they used, I believe they used the impact of what the additional apartments would be at 444. And then, but they didn't bring the other, so it came up to 7%.
Well, Susan can comment on that. I don't think that any of these things could potentially produce a 25% increase in the population, which is currently about 7,500 people. So that would be, over 2,000 new residents. What's your take on that, Susan? Did you hear that?
Yeah, I agree, Mayor. I'm not exactly sure what the 7% and 25% refers to. But I will say, I think I heard the comment that there was concern that the analysis wasn't looking at sites that have been previously developed, but maybe not fully occupied. And that's why we did include those in the update to the analysis. I will say that some of those sites, though, have been occupied for several years now. And so the impacts have been felt and are already being felt when you look at things like water usage, the school children, police, fire, ambulance. So the ones that have been kind of occupied and on the market for several years now, those are sort of already known factors. We did pull them into the analysis. We did want to look at them, but we also don't want to sort of double count things that have kind of already been in place.
Mm-hmm. So take a look, Tom, in the report will be up on our website. It's up on our website now, right?
Yeah.
You should take a look and see whether the point Susan just made accommodate that.
Right, I mean.
Yeah.
They did add more into tonight's discussion.
Yes, they did.
That was there in the last one. That's
right.
Clear. And the last comment would be this. I see nothing wrong with the numbers because they're done with information that's gotten from reliable sources. I don't agree with the numbers, but I agree the way that they got to the numbers.
Meaning you think they're not realistic?
They're not realistic to the village, period.
Okay.
And when I speak to many of my friends in the village that do belong to the fire department and the ambulance corps, I'm sure you must have heard it because it's out there in the village. There's the fear that the fire department in the near future will have to be paid because it is very difficult to man people on the department. New people coming in, new residents coming in, they're possibly not at the same mindset of the people that used to live in Pleasantville. My daughter was part of the fire department. My son was part of the fire department in all the years they lived here. New people are less likely to join because from where they come from, it was a paid fire department and they don't even think about this. And I throw into that also the ambulance. Right now, the Pleasantville Fire Department relies greatly, as does the other surrounding communities, on mutual aid. If it wasn't for mutual aid, there'd be a lot more fires burning down structures. And as far as, and so that's on one side. As far as the traffic studies and time of day, I'm sure that's all accurate the way that it was prescribed, but in real life, it just doesn't work that way. If it takes an extra traffic light, when the traffic lights get back installed and the roads are back to normal, if it takes an extra traffic light for a car to get through. That doesn't matter to you and me, but it does if it's the ambulance that's trying to get through to get to your house to save your child. So there's a lot of thinking that should go into, can't fix what was already, to change what was already done, but going forward, I'm just asking for you to really think. There are numbers, you can make numbers say anything you want them to say. I said that before with statistics. And I'm not arguing with the way these numbers came about. But if you sit down and look at them when you're not on camera, you might also see that, they're real, but they're not realistic. And with that, I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, sir. Bernie, do you have a thought?
The order 17 will take place. I just had a couple of comments. I'm actually here for the
Ethics board, yes.
Discussion.
Right.
But listening to this, I have several comments to make. One is on the analysis in the central business district. Was the property located at the corner of Washington Avenue, Manville Road, where the Roots Rise is and where the brokerage, was that part of the analysis of development?
That is one of the sites, yes.
Yeah.
I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
Listening to it.
Yeah.
My concern is I've expressed it before is closing of the slip lane. One of the reasons I favor of the moratorium, you don't know what the impact's going to be. Of the closing of the slip lane and all the traffic around Manville Road, Memorial Plaza, Washington Avenue, until these properties are developed, in use, occupied. And I think that allowing further development without knowing the consequences of those decisions, I think is premature. How you deal with that is obviously a question. The other is I would encourage you to consider long range. When I moved to Pleasantville, there were 2 elementary schools. And then enrollment declined, they closed it. In 1995, when my oldest daughter graduated Pleasantville High School, there were 65 children in the senior class. So if you start making decisions that's going to impact the next 10 years, things and enrollment may be going down now, but enrollment can turn around and you'll be back. And if you make decisions to reduce your capital availability, your structure availability, it may end up that the future board is going to have to deal with a shortage. So I think that's a concern. There was a lot of talk here about the water. When I negotiated with the town of Newcastle for the purchase of the Newcastle plant, we were reserved 2 million gallons a day. So I assume you're talking about the raw water from New York City.
Right.
As a limitation, because you have like 60 million gallons a day.
It's not that, as Susan mentioned, it's not that, as you well know, it's not that the water gets turned off. They just charge a higher rate above that allotment.
For the water.
For the raw
but
water.
Not for the operation of the plant. Because in the discussion, someone listening to the discussion, you think we're close to the maximum allowable use that we can get from the plant. That, oh, we're going to have to build a new plant. We're going to have.
Yeah.
That's only the raw water from New York City. We have plenty of capacity.
Yeah, plenty. We were last week, we had the joint meeting we have annually at the water plant, got the presentation, got the report for what's on the docket for next year. So as I have in the past, I thank you and the board at that era for a very, very foresighted.
I just thought this discussion tonight was leaving the impression, we're coming up 27.
No, thank you for pointing that out.
It's an excellent water treatment plant.
So there's one attendee here who's raised their hand. Someone named Stephen. Are you there, Stephen? Stephen?
Unmute.
I gave him talking permitted. He is muted. Stephen, are you listening? No response. But says Lynn Russell. It might be Lynn or it might be Peter. Hello,
Hello there.
Russell. Yes, I thought it might be Peter.
Okay, hello. Thank you all. I just want to say
Peter
first,
Russell, give us your
yes, I
address.
should
We know it.
identify myself. Edward's my given name, called Peter Russell at 114 Ashland Avenue, Pleasantville.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for this discussion tonight and the presentation. I think the analysis is excellent. I appreciate this great response to the community concerns. I just have one or two comments or questions. One is, I was surprised in the discussion of the impact on infrastructure that there was no reference to what the impact of these additional residents may have in the sense of need of downtown civic open space, which I think is anticipated in a way in the village's plan for civic space at the north end of Memorial Plaza. I think that's another reason to continue to support that initiative. Secondly, I was glad to hear some of the discussion about the affordable housing dimension of future development. I, for one, would favor a ratio higher than the 10% we have. And I would favor that we have some flexibility in terms of the area median income levels. So it's not just 80% or 60% even. Thirdly, I know that some of the concerns we hear from folks are about number of children coming into the school system. And I, for one, find this a surprising comment. We are a community that loves children. We can handle more children. They are welcome. We should not be overly restrictive on unit size or anything else that limits children coming in and growing up in this village. And my last comment is, I think it was a great recommendation to do more work on the design guidelines, make them more challenging, and make them reflect the concerns that you're hearing from villagers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Let me just, Susan had shown in her presentation the last 10 years of the school enrollment. I have the data on the school enrollment from 1976 to 2022. And as Bernie already alluded, the period in the 80s was a substantial dip. It started to rise again in the later 90s. The all-time high based on the past 50 years was in 2009, not associated, to my knowledge, with any new housing, just a change in the dynamics. And long story short, the enrollment today is about 8 kids more than existed in 1976. And it is about 220 kids lower than 2009. So, among other things, further to what Bernie said, it's clear that from that chart that things ebb and flow. But I also think, and Susan, perhaps you have more professional data on this, I think we are seeing fewer families with more than 2 kids, certainly fewer families with 4 or 5 kids. Is that what's going on in the world? Are you there still, Susan?
Yes, I was speaking eloquently and on mute. Again, I was saying, yes, we saw with the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, that was sort of the peak. And we saw the birth rate really go down, regionally, nationwide. Since then, and it has not recovered. Families are just smaller. People aren't having as many children. People aren't having children at all in many cases. They're having them later. That's just leading to smaller households, really across the board. I mean, not every community is seeing a declining enrollment. There are still communities that maybe have larger families than others. There's a lot of different factors, but your experience in terms of a declining enrollment is not unique elsewhere in the region, we're seeing that plenty.
Yeah.
So,
I wanted to speak to the civic space point that you made, Peter, as well. Just to say that I agree that when we're looking at the downtown district in particular and the development that has already happened, that we need to think about how to balance that out with public space. And so the good news is that a portion of the civic space is already in the works, and the cost for which is going to be significantly offset by state funds that we accrued. And in fact, we discussed the plan for that briefly with our superintendent of public works during our work session. So I appreciate your flagging that.
Thank you.
all right, any other further comments or questions? We can release Susan from her Zoom bondage. Thank you, Susan. Sounds like
Thank
you had a
you
long
all.
day today.
Have a good night.
All
Take
right,
care.
we appreciate your good work.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comment from the public on any subject at the moment? All right, let's bounce to our resolutions so we can get through this and get to the ethics board stuff, which Bernie had come for. Paul 163.
Result, the Board of Trustees hereby approves the minutes of the regular meeting held on April 24th, 2023.
Is there a second? Let me just share my screen here. Okay, is there a second?
Okay.
Comments or corrections to the minutes? All in favor? Aye, motion approved. 164, Nicole.
Budget transfers in the general fund, $500 from admin conference to legal notices contractual, $1,000 from admin conference to municipal associations, $75,000 from contingency to police overtime, $2,000 from parking contractual to police vehicle repairs, $15.34 from workers' comp insurance to life insurance, and $7,000 from parks equipment to pool repairs. That's a total of $85,515.34. Budget transfer of the refuse fund, $699.64 from refuse employee retirement to refuse health insurance, $130.09 from refuse employee retirement to refuse dental and vision. That's a total of $829.73.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the subject of police overtime, folks could refer back to Chief Grubsner's quarterly report to us last meeting, but it's been high. One mitigating impact is that some of it gets reimbursed. All the work we've done with the utility companies trailing around when they need to close roads for work gets reimbursed, which isn't to say it hasn't been high, because it has, for a bunch of reasons that, if you're interested, the chief elucidated in his report. All in favor? Aye. Motion approved. 165, Dave.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby approves the abstract for payment claims dated May 8th, 2023 for fiscal year ending 2023, covering check numbers 107080 to 107248. From the general fund, $167,542.40. The special fund, $326.09. The water fund, $129,617.80. The capital fund, $20,972.11. The refuse fund, $7,510.50, for a total of $325,968.97. The payment of claims is attached.
Is there a second? Second. Comments or questions about the payment of claims? All in favor? Aye, motion approved. 166, Michael.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the abstract payment of claims dated May 8th, 2023 for fiscal year 2024, covering check numbers 107249 to 107251. From the general fund, $16,933.70. And that is also the total payment of claims attached.
Is there a second?
Second.
So that would be the payment of claims that accrue to events next year.
Correct, mainly.
The music festival. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. Back to you, Paul. 167.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby accepts the resignation of Isaiah Jordan, Recreation Assistant, Panther Club, effective April 15th, 2023. Attached to this resolution is a resignation letter.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 168, Nicole.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby accepts the resignation of Kiara Edwards, Recreation Assistant, Panther Club, effective April 15th, 2023. The letter is attached.
Is there a second?
Second.
I should have mentioned the first one, as we have commented many times, that as Mike Newman, our rec superintendent, has commented many times, there's an inevitable churn in the world of our, give or take, 20 some odd Panther Club employees. And we're always interested in folks who may be interested in that role. So please reach out to our Parks and Rec department if you're at all interested. 168, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. 169, David.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby accepts the resignation of Joseph Boca, laborer, effective July 10th, 2023.
That should be.
July 10, 2021. Cleaning up the.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, that's changes approved by the mover and the seconder. Did we have a second? Somebody?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. So that is just cleaning up files where there wasn't a final.
Opens up a spot.
Okay. Otherwise, civil service says you can't have it.
Correct.
170, Michael.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorize the village administrator to sign a sponsorship agreement with the Refreshed Home for the 2023 Pleasantville Music Festival.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
As I said at the outset, pleasantvillemusicfestival.com. Buy your tickets Saturday, July 8th, 171 Paul.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby authorize the village administrator to sign a sponsorship agreement with Captain Lawrence for 2023 Pleasantville Music Festival.
Is there a second?
Second.
Captain Lawrence has been with us almost from the very beginning, and we appreciate not only their support, but the good service they provide to our concert goers. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 172, Nicole.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village administrator to sign the special events permit application from the New York State Liquor Authority for the Pleasantville Music Festival.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 163, 73, David.
Resolved, the Village Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village administrator to execute a Q-year agreement with Comp Alliance FOA and Sons for workers' compensation insurance for an annual premium amount of $134,078.
Is there a second?
Second.
Switching horses on our workers' comp insurance.
Yep, yeah, saving us some money and they're providing a 2-year fixed term.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 174.
Whereas the village of Pleasantville seeks to enhance stormwater management at the pool facility as part of the pool reconstruction project, and whereas the Bruin Engineering has submitted a proposal not to exceed $150,000 for site/civil engineering, construction administration, and permitting services. Now therefore be it resolved that the village board of trustees hereby authorizes the village administrator to execute the agreement with the Bruin Engineering attached hereto in an amount not to exceed $150,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Substantial discussion, all of that with Anthony Carr, our DBW superintendent and village engineer in our work session. If that's of interest to you, you can pick it up in an on-demand webcast at pctv76.org within a few days. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 175, Paul.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby adopt the revised village sexual harassment policy as required by the state of New York guidelines effective May 9, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Substantial change? Not really.
Relatively minor, having
Right.
to do with telework, but New York State came out with enhanced guidance.
Mhm. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. And then just to be clear, those policies apply to all village employees as well as members of boards and commissions, correct?
Correct. Part-time, full-time.
Yes. Okay. All right, 176, Nicole.
That's a good one. Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby appoints Sarah Johnson to the title Coordinator, Senior Citizen Services, job title code 0338, effective June 1st, 2023, at a salary of $75,000. Said appointment is subject to a probationary period of not less than 12 weeks to a maximum of 52 weeks.
Is there a second?
Second.
Happy news, been through an interview process and occasioned by the retirement of Joni Ehrlich. Sarah has impressed us all mightily, and we look forward to having her on board. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion approved. 177, David.
Resolve the Board of Trustees hereby approves the hiring of Owen Mullen, is that right, Owen? Yeah. Welsh or something, recreation assistant, job class code 0269, an hourly rate of $20, budget code A7330.101, Panther Club effective May 9th, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome. 178, Michael.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the police chief to close Washington Avenue between Edgewood Avenue to Manville Road from 7 to 11 a.m. on May 20th, 2023. Post no parking signs along the route and to tow all vehicles violating the temporary parking restriction.
Is there a second?
Second.
Longstanding Pleasantville tradition, the community scholarship fund raises money with a 5K walk run. Signs all around village, sign up, register, and run or walk on behalf of the community scholarship fund. All in favor? Aye, motion approved. 180, Paul.
Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby appoints Pamela Pappas to the Ethics Board effective May 9, 2023 for a term of to expire April 2026.
Is there a second?
Second.
Shout out to Pam for being willing to take this on. Our ethics board is a team of 3, Bernie Gordon, former mayor, John Nona, former mayor, both lawyers. John is the county attorney at the moment. Pam joins that group to fill the 3rd slot. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 181, Nicole.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees approves the request by the Superintendent of Recreation and Parks to establish annually a seasonal petty cash fund in the amount of $100 for the purpose of making change at the village pool. The memo is attached.
Is there a second?
Second.
So is this an evergreen resolution?
We like to do it every year.
So it's not to establish annually, it's to establish for the current year?
Correct.
Should we modify that to reflect this? I mean, you tell me.
We could do that.
Okay, to establish for the 2023 season, a petty cash fund in the amount of. Mover and second are happy with that?
Should we debate?
Let's debate. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. 182.
We're living the dream here. Whereas bids were advertised in the official village newspaper and received on May 3rd, 2023 for bid 2023-03 roadway pavement management program, and whereas bids were received as per the following and reviewed by the superintendent of public works, the bidder ELQ Industries Inc. for a total bid of $524,800. Pat Paving Inc. for a total bid of $562,031.50. 50 cents. Bidder Laura Lee Industries for a total of $572,450. Montesano Brothers Inc. Bid total of $630,708.75. And Consortium Brothers Paving and Seal Coating for a bid total of $658,561. Now therefore be resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby awards the bid for roadway pavement management program to ELQ Industries Inc. through December 31st, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Memo is attached. Please have a little bit, ELQ.
I just want to know how Pat Paving got to the extra 50 cents on their bid.
Yeah, or Montesano. 5 cents.
Oh, yeah, 75 cents.
Comments, questions?
There's a comment from the audience.
We don't usually have comments from the audience on this, but I'm happy to have it.
If I could say anything to get the board to get the phone number to call the state or the county
Yes,
while we're talking about roadways. The Manville Road at Pleasantville Road by the parking lot by Pleasantville Ford, as well
I
as
totally agree.
just north of the Bedford Road
Yes.
School. There was I witnessed coming home, an accident, and almost an accident there. Cars are dodging around over to the right to avoid the worst. And then there are idiots on the left that are passing those cars. And
Yes, I agree.
fortunately, nothing happened, but
It's a
I
state,
know it's not the village.
right, state
it's a
road,
problem.
but our DPW guys are on them all the time.
I know, but
Yeah.
maybe they need a bigger stick.
So we diverge, but I will say, we had an extended presentation by the Region 8 Department of Transportation Commissioner a few months ago at the Municipal Officials Association, and in their modest defense, they have a dramatically reduced headcount as compared to a decade ago. So the DOT has been substantially pinched, and we all feel it. That said, we need safe roads. So, all right, all in favor of 182? Aye. Motion approved. 183, Michael.
Resolved that the village board of trustees hereby authorizes the creation of the capital account for the Wheeler Avenue parking lot electric vehicle charging station project.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 184, Paul.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the request from Pleasant Recreation Department to hold Memorial Day Parade on Monday, May 29th, 2023 at 10 a.m. Said parade route to begin at Bedford Road School, proceed down Bedford Road to the Memorial Plaza, concluding with a ceremony at the World War II Monument. And further resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the police chief to post no parking signs along the parade route and in the Memorial Plaza and to tow all vehicles violating this temporary parking restriction.
Is there a second?
Second.
So as mentioned earlier, May 29th, our annual Memorial Day service. Join us, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. 185, Nicole.
Okay,
This is perfect.
yes, indeed. Whereas the Village of Pleasantville pledged to take part in the New York State DEC Climate Smart Community Certification Program that includes the preparation of the Government Operations Climate Action Plan. And whereas the Government Operations Climate Action Plan is a strategy document that sets goals and outlines a set of initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provides a framework for achieving those targets. And whereas free technical assistance is available to support the development of the inventory and plan from the Hudson Valley Regional Council, HBRC, through a New York State DEC Climate Smart Communities Coordinator Services contract. And whereas a completed climate action plan counts towards climate smart communities certification, specifically one PE2 action, government action, operations climate action plan. That's something that one earns points for. Explain more. Whereas the Climate Smart Task Force, comprised of municipal officials and environmental volunteer community leaders, will collaborate with HVRC in the development of these publications, review drafts, and provide valuable feedback on iterations that result in the final draft. And whereas the task force will provide an opportunity for public input and comment on the draft report. And whereas the task force will present a summary of the draft Government Operations Climate Action Plan to the Board of Trustees for consideration of adoption. Therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby undertakes a Government Operations Climate Action Plan, and be it therefore resolved that the municipal board authorizes submission of these documents to the New York State DEC Office for Climate Change for consideration of points towards Climate Smart Communities certification for the Village of Pleasantville.
Is there a second?
Second.
Pretty self-explanatory.
That's great.
Yeah, so I've been participating in a series of meetings held by the Hudson Valley Regional Council where they work you through the different steps. And just to be clear, this is a climate action plan for the municipality specifically, which is, to set out goals for how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and reach certain reduction goals by certain dates. So to be continued.
Thank you for that effort. All in favor?
Hi.
My motion approved. Last one, David, 186.
I don't have that.
Here, it
Okay,
was added on there.
I got it. Resolved, the Board of Trustees hereby schedules a public hearing to consider introductory local law 4/2023 to add angled parking on the west side of Memorial Plaza and the west side of the center median of Memorial Plaza between Manville Road and Bedford Road for May 22nd, 2023 at 8 p.m. on the second floor of Village Hall, 80 Wheeler Avenue, Pleasantville, New York, 10570.
Is there a second? So we'll describe this in detail at the public hearing on the 22nd. We described it in detail in the work session earlier with Anthony Carr, our DPW superintendent, but the short version of the story is to establish the angled parking, which you already see against the median between Bedford and the gazebo, will now occur all the way up and on both sides of the street.
And our code is unique in that we call out the angle of parking in the village, so in order to update that, it needs to be by way of local law.
Okay. All in favor? Aye, motion approved. That was the last of our regular agenda items. Is there any comment from the board, new matters? Or anything of the sort? Or can we return to work session to have a discussion about the proposed update to the ethics code?
Can I just say, at some point, I don't know when this would be appropriate, but I would like to talk about some measures that we could do to support businesses downtown. And one of the ideas that was floated was having a map that would be a digital map that we could have a QR code to. So I'm essentially asking, is this like a work session item? When
Yeah, it's a
could we
work
discuss
session
something
item.
like-
Yeah,
We
have
have,
conversation with
Yeah.
Chamber of Commerce, no doubt, right?
Yeah,
We have the parking map that we distributed through the chamber.
right.
But yeah, if we use the enhance that.
This is less about parking, more about supporting retail and other businesses.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
calling out the location and, okay.
Right,
sure.
right.
We could chat about that at work session.
Okay. I just
All right.
wanted to know.
And I wanted to add, what we add, the block party
Yeah,
to, as a resolution, because we have a date. We just haven't announced it yet.
sure, we can send me an email
Okay.
requesting that
And once
we.
we have a work session also, Paul, just to let us know what you're planning and the scope of it and, is it bigger than it was planned to be last year or the same size or smaller, all of the
yeah.
above? Yeah.
That sounds good.
So maybe the first one in June we can shoot for.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll pencil it in.
All right, anything else?
Very quickly, I brought up an idea about senior parking hang tags at the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, and I did do some reconnaissance from Newton, Massachusetts, is the town that has a very impressive senior living program for the whole municipality. I talked to their senior director on the phone and I read through all their sites, so I think it's worth talking about in a work session
Sure.
sometime.
Yeah.
The percentage uptake seems like something we could handle here if it's similar to what they do.
They found it to be a success. Good.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's talk about it. All right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for your attention. Come back and see us 2 weeks from today on Monday, the 20th. But before that, come and see us all and the rest of your community on Saturday, May 20th for Pleasantville Day. All right. Back to work session.
We also have Eric Gordon just logged in.
Eric Gordon, you've logged in. Are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, Bernie's here with us. You want to pull up a chair, Bernie, and come up or? So has everyone had a chance to use the take a look at the revised document?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so,
Obviously,
yeah, so,
Yeah, we need to have chairs. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. so, Bernie and John, and Eric Gordon have been, working on this, and there was some concern at the last meeting that it might be, some aspect of it might be too broad. I did not think that, but you want to comment, Bernie, about?
well, I think we changed it.
Yes, you did.
I think
Yeah,
that
that was the.
The revision
I
is
agree,
good.
there's some, Eric can speak to it, but
Yeah,
my concern is that we did put the limitation with regard to a required, if you're dealing with something that's gonna be a required public hearing. that was
Right.
fine.
Mhm.
So did that address the issue?
Yeah, I think it's much more clear than it was the first time. around. I do, yeah.
Person.
Yeah, I still, I think it is more clear. I still struggle to, I think with examples, and it's hard for me to, in a small town, think of examples where, well, what I brought up last time was that in a town of our size with 2,500 households, inevitably you're going to know very well people who are involved in every matter of government. They're going to be your neighbors, your friends, your kids on a soccer team with them. A lot of members of all of our boards run businesses or do business in town. So I was just trying to understand with examples what things the ethics board would like us to recuse ourselves from that are not financial, right? So the financial ones are clear, but it was hard for me to understand which ones. Like, for example, if there's something I live in the old village, if there's something that we are enacting that benefits the old village, is that improper? Because my neighbors told me that.
This is my,
You know what I mean? It's almost like representative government, in a way, encourages you to represent your neighbors or represent the people that talk to you.
this is my personal view, and one of the things I'm concerned about. Everybody in this village that serves on a board has friends. And you know everybody. My example is that in a public hearing, somebody comes before you, you have a view, but as a public official, you should keep that to yourself. If you decide at a public hearing before it goes to the planning board or before it goes to some other commission to express your views publicly, you've now told that applicant they're not going to get a fair hearing. So the idea is, in my opinion, is that yes, you can have an opinion, but you listen, because it may be that in a formal hearing, your opinion might change. Everybody's entitled to a fair, impartial hearing. And if you express yourself publicly before the hearing about your view of something, the applicant can say, I'm not getting a fair hearing here. And at that point, you should recuse yourself. That's my view.
So
That's why.
Yeah, no, Bernie, if I could add to that. So one of the I had sent around an article. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at it, and I don't know if
I did, yes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the examples they give is like where planning board members sign a petition in support of a development project and then voted on it. And a court found that, even though that wasn't a financial conflict of interest, or that wasn't necessarily a precluded conflict under Article 18, which typically talks about financial interest, they said that given their having signed the petition, made their opinion known, that they should have recused themselves and shouldn't have voted on it. So this really codifies that common law type of appearance of impropriety recusal standard, and sort of puts officials and employees on notice of that. And I think we tried to, spell it out pretty specifically what constitutes an appearance of impropriety, rather than just leaving it to a, where it typically comes up is in a common law aspect. Somebody says, well, if somebody would come to me and say, well, I signed a petition in favor of this in favor of this development previously, they come to the village attorney, should I vote on this? And I would typically tell them no. Now I'll have the ethics code to say, well, under this provision of the ethics code, that would constitute an appearance of impropriety. And you should, under our ethics code, you should recuse yourself under that. So that's really what it's codifying.
So to follow up on that then, Eric, Nicole in her recent election, presumably at some point, said to people that she was in favor of the civic space. And that was one of the things that they decided when they were voting for or not voting for. Does she then need to recuse herself when we're voting for the civic space?
Well, town board, I think village board members are different than this was a planning commission member, and town board members do vote on village board members vote on certain certain positions that they're in favor of or not. So for a village board member, I would say the standard is different than a planning commission member.
Well, although there's a related issue. I mean, the example, correct me if you see it differently, either of you. What you proposed or brought up was a village board member in the context of an election saying, I support X.
Right.
And it isn't a hearing about somebody's property rights or their desire to do something. It's about a decision of how the board and its members would use public money and develop public space. There are people opposed to it, obviously. But that's different from the judgment of someone before zoning or planning who comes and says, I want to do something, arriving in the presence of, I mean, just for example, in my case, I was on the planning commission many years ago when Stop and Shop bought the MLA property. And started the process of community gatherings and had an event in the high school promoting the notion of building a super Stop and Shop where MLA was, now where Hinkle's is. And I went to that hearing, but I was on the planning commission. It would have been a matter that was a village board matter that changed the zoning, although it would have come to the planning commission if it had gone through that process. And I felt on that circumstance obligated not to say anything at all, because I felt like that would be an inappropriate comment on a matter that might be before the planning commission. And, we've had, go ahead.
One of the confusions is, and Eric can correct me, because is that what you're referring to, no one's entitled to a zoning change. So you can express as a village board your view about a zoning change. Once the zoning change is in place and someone says, I go to the zoning board, I want a variance, at that point, they're entitled under the law to a fair and impartial hearing. So you can't go back to the village board meeting and say, if that goes to the zoning board, I'm against it. There, at that point, you have to recuse yourself because that person's not getting a fair hearing. So I think in the statute, it talks about the required hearing, not just any policy decision that you might want to comment on when you're running for public office.
So I think I'm understanding this more. So you're really trying to focus on specific hearings that are about individuals, not about the other local laws that we
My
deliberate.
personal thing is to protect the village from liability.
Okay.
Because if you didn't recuse yourself and an application is turned down and they go before the court for an Article 78 proceeding and say they didn't receive a fair hearing, you've lost control of that development. Court can say, no, you have to approve it. They didn't get a fair hearing. I mean,
And the one possibility where a village board would be, let's say you have a zone change and it affects, it's a zone change regarding only certain properties and one village board member actually owns some of those properties. That may be, that possibly could fall under a financial interest. It depends on what the zoning change is. But again, the hypotheticals that were in that article say, look, if you have a personal interest in an ownership interest in one of those properties affected by the zone change, that could, that very well could be a case where you should recuse yourself. And I think in the hypothetical they gave, it said you should. Now, a general village-wide zone change that affects a number of properties, including properties owned by the village board members, that wouldn't necessarily be a personal interest if it affects a broad swath of properties, including properties owned by village board members. So it's a case-by-case basis. You can't ever, create a law that covers every example of an appearance of impropriety. It's still going to be based on the facts and circumstances relating to each situation. So,
I mean, and there's no way to completely draw the right line. If you're on the zoning board and your next door neighbor seeks a variance, you should recuse yourself, right? Because whether you were going to vote yes or no, it's clearly perceived to be underlain by your personal interest. If you're 2 houses away, is that different? Probably it is, but it's worth the conversation. And honestly, I think it's helpful in a circumstance like this to have the notion present in everyone's mind, and they can go to Bernie and John and now Pam and say, hey, what do you think? And on some occasions in the past, again, with a thinner ethics code than we have before, you guys have said, no, it's okay, right?
Well, yes, the current code is very narrow and really emphasized just the financial interest, which to me is not necessarily
not enough.
No, to me,
I agree.
And one of the things that people will comment on is, well, it's limiting my right of free speech. I can't talk about something. If you take a position on a planning commission or a village board, or there are certain limitations that you have to consider about when and how you present your view. Not that your views are, limited, but there's an appropriate place and time.
I mean, we haven't had this problem, but certainly elsewhere in the region and in the state, no doubt all over the country, there are circumstances where, there are bitter divisions between people, and you have mayors saying, I'm not gonna vote for anything that jerk wants to do, right? And even the suggestion that zoning has been changed in some way to outflank a specific person. We have never had that, and I don't think we're likely to, but it is important for all of us, everyone, boards, commissions, et cetera, to realize, we have some capacity to affect other people's interests, and you have to be careful about it. I mean, I can tell you many times, you probably had this experience as mayor too, that there are moments when someone comes to you and, wants you to sort of put your hand on the scale of justice in some way, like, as if that's routine, which perhaps it is in many places. It's not here, and I don't. But I can tell you there are lots of places where I don't think people make a clear enough distinction between small town government serving people and small town government greasing the ways for people who have access and not for those who don't.
So the other commissions, especially about, zoning board of appeals and ARB, I see how they're usually about specific people and specific properties, but most of what we do is not about that, but it might be about a street, it might be about Wheeler, or it might be about a parking change on a block. And I guess that's where I'm trying to understand what the village board's impropriety would be. Like if we were to change parking on Wheeler in front of a business owner on Wheeler on our board, or a parking change in front of our other business owner, right? Would they have to say, we can't vote on these?
No, I think, look, if you have a social relationship with somebody, that's typically not enough to say you have to recuse yourself. I mean, you really have to have more than just a social relationship where you know people or you're friends with them. It really has to be a very close relationship. Again, it's a case by case basis, but in the article that I gave, it says members of voting bodies and elected legislators in particular should exercise restraint with respect to recusal, because recusal and abstention by a member of a voting body has the same effect as a nay vote. In the case of an elected legislator, also has the effect of disenfranchising voters. So really, they say for especially for the village board, a social relationship really has to be a special relationship to merit a recusal. So,
if the mayor has a business on Wheeler, should he avoid voting on things that concern like parking or outdoor dining or whatever on Wheeler?
That may, if it could impact his business, that may be a situation where he shouldn't, where he needs to recuse. If he has a personal interest in that vote.
I feel like the word self-serving here does important work in the rephrasing, right? To me, it helps understand the distinction that you're trying to establish here, that an action is self-serving rather than impartial. It helps me kind of,
I think there's an example that Peter and Eric, we all can relate to. You as a board, to me, you talked about street fairs and things. It's not a zoning change. It's not a planning board.
right.
You are the board of police commissioners. So what Peter and I could know that when a policeman was charged with, and Eric was our counsel at the time, was being discharged by the police chief, and he came for a hearing before the board. We had to make sure that we never commented on it, no matter how we felt personally, whether whether his actions were wrong, or there were people in the village pressing us, drop the charges against the policeman. And we had to tell the public, we can't comment on it because we are the board of police commissioners and we have to vote.
despite a vigorous effort on the part of his attorney to goad us into,
Yes, and he was, he sued us.
we were all sued for $1
We were all sued
million.
individually. So, but otherwise, if you want to, even if it's a street fair on your street, it's not a conflict of interest.
Nor is it a conflict of interest in my opinion. I have a second floor business. And obviously talked to a lot of people on Wheeler, parking, 5 minute, 10 minute, changing an hour to 2 hour. None of those things are self-serving. I get a lot of comment from people who have an opinion about how they ought to be, but honestly, when Pleasantville Pizza says, as they did years back, we need, a couple of spots that are quick turnover. That was a self-serving request, but one that the board at the time accepted as a logical means of trying to support local business, recognizing there's a different demand. So, as I said before, there are plenty of circumstances where it isn't a right line and someone could make the argument that. So,
I have a question regarding process, Eric. So we know there's a formal process to go to the ethics board, you fill out the form, but there may be these circumstances that arise that the mayor may want an informal recommendation from you. Is there a threshold at which it should formally go to the ethics board or can be directed to you for a one-off?
I would definitely say it gets directed if there's a question on a recusal where it's an appearance of impropriety, it doesn't really fall within the financial conflict of interest. I can look at it. I can, give my recommendation. If I think it's a very close call, I would probably say, well, I think it's worth putting this in front of the ethics board and getting an ethics opinion on it. Especially if it's a controversial issue, that may be something, we want to get vetted by the ethics board. And that's why the ethics board is there to, if there's a close call, they provide their assessment of it and can give and there's even a local flavor to it that's brought in by the ethics board, and that's why it's there. So, but I definitely recommend coming to me first, seeing if I'm able to get a bright, sort of a bright line answer. If I am, I'll give it to you. If I think it's something that needs to go to the ethics board, then I would recommend doing that. So. And, look, in some circumstances, a member or a village board member may want to go to the ethics board anyway, even if I give them an opinion and say, look, I just want to be sure, that this isn't looked on as something that's that I'm acting improperly on, and I want to get this opinion. And again, that's why the ethics board is there, to give those opinions in those close situations, or to give comfort to a board member who wants wants the backup of the ethics board to say, I can participate in a particular question.
I mean, one thing that inevitably happens, no doubt, on planning and zoning at various points is an architect comes before them who may be the architect that they themselves hired for their own home. What would you say about that?
Look, it depends on when it was and how long ago. And, if it's a current situation where you're working with that architect and involved in them, you probably want to recuse yourself because you don't want to decide something against an architect who is currently working on your home. I mean, look, you can tell, you can tell me I can be fair and impartial. That may be one we want to send to the ethics board. If it's a current situation and that board member does want to participate, they may want to get the opinion of the ethics board on it.
Yeah, right. I mean, those kinds of things likely happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Especially if you told the architect you'll vote yes if you'll reduce your
Well, that's why you may want to step aside, because somebody could say, hey, you're voting in favor for it to get a favor from the architect who's working on your house currently. That's why becomes a more difficult call at that point. So
So now I have a question, two ways almost. One is, let's say if I'm working in my professional life and let's say I'm representing someone in criminal court here. Now, obviously we work we make decisions on the court itself.
Yeah, not too many really.
Enough, I would say.
The budget.
The budget.
Right.
Should I be recusing myself from working, either making a decision on the budget or not representing somebody?
I'd have to look at that, because that could create, there could be a financial interest that you're getting a financial benefit representing in front of a board that's or in front of an office of the village government, I'd have to look at, that one seems problematic to me, but, I'd have to look at exactly what the relationship is and, what you're doing. But typically, a village board member would not be appearing on behalf of an applicant in front of any boards. And I don't know the answer with respect to village court, but it would seem to me the same thing would apply. But I don't know the answer for you off the top of my head.
But I haven't. I've stopped since I became a trustee.
I mean,
but I have the question always, because I do have people who want me. And I said, I'd pass it over to someone
Well,
else.
it gives, look, if you have a village board member appearing before the court, it gives you certain greater, impetus or respect, before that court, which I think would create, and beyond the beyond the fact that you're making a financial interest from appearing before a village entity, which could be grounds for recusal in and of itself. So I'd have to look at that one. I don't know the answer specifically for court, but I know you couldn't act as a representative in front of any of the boards, obviously, in front of the zoning board or planning commission or anything like that. So I would assume the same thing would apply to court, but I'd have to check on that.
Well, makes sense.
So my final question, just to confirm it for me, you said earlier that a social relationship does not constitute in your mind an appearance of impropriety. And I just want to reiterate that almost by definition, in an elected position, everyone on this board knows a lot of people. That's how you end up getting elected. Then you maintain those relationships, and the way you represent people is by having a strong social network, of hundreds of people in a town of not very many. So as long as you're saying that social relationships are not what you mean here, then I think I understand it. But I was concerned last meeting about the wording, that there's someone I coach soccer with, that I can't be a part of.
No, that obviously not a relationship like that. If
he
it's,
he has a hot tub in the backyard, so I think that's strictly off the.
I think here's where I'm. If the social relationship, if the decision you're going to make requires under the village code or the law that you be fair and impartial.
But this is appearance. That's
yes,
appearance of impropriety, right?
Yes, that's correct. But if it's a social relationship, it comes before the board, then that on a discretionary item, where there's no requirement that appeal to an Article 78 proceeding, that they weren't entitled to a fair and public. I don't think that the social relationship have any issue here. It's when that law requires that you have a fair and impartial hearing, that that if you have an appearance that I can't think of that situation where that social appearance would disqualify.
I mean, if you're a planning commission member who's had a, longstanding relationship with a property owner who, I mean, I don't know, for years, where you take vacations together and are your kids godparents, you may feel that you can't be impartial in that situation if you're a planning commission member and there's a lot of opposition to what that person wants to do on their property. That may be a situation where you need, you should recuse yourself under this. But it really has to be more than just a social, just then, people and you've had just, conversations with them, you've had coffee with them, even you've gone out to dinner with them, numbers of times. It's really got to be more than that to
For example, if you fly on their private jet and
Would they pay your grandnephew's tuition? Is that everything bearing?
Yeah, it's the appearance of impropriety of
I don't know.
the statutes of ethics for this.
Maybe I'm overthinking this. I'm just thinking about, we live in a fishbowl here, so
Yeah.
you're out to dinner with someone and 100 other people see you out to dinner with that person. And then a month later, there's some matter before the board that affects that person. That's what I'm thinking about. Like that's.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, another one.
But somebody could raise that no matter if this law is there or not. That's going to be an issue no matter what. And you have to decide for yourself whether you can be fair and impartial in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, what helps me in the rephrasing, as I said last time, I was always in favor of the spirit of the statute. It was the wording and what appeared to me as a vagueness last time, which I found problematic. But what helps me here is that the appearance of impropriety is defined. So, whereas that phrase can seem vague, there's a definition, and of course, there's always going to be room for interpretation. But the contrast that is set forth between a self-serving action and impartiality, I feel like provides a framework for that interpretation that is sufficiently clear, at least in my mind.
I think it just happens to be sometimes gray areas that, like, for example, let's say I, as an adult, enjoy going to, let's say, the Soul Brewing to have a beer outside. And so now we're gonna vote whether we're gonna allow the outdoor seating. Now, how much of that becomes because, is it self-serving because I enjoy sitting outside, or is it more because I think that it's good for the community to have a place where they can congregate?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I think, I would say you're okay on that one, to be honest.
Okay, I mean, that's,
I think you're okay too. I
But
mean,
if you're an alcoholic.
would there, well, I mean, I was gonna say, if you're, if you're there almost all the time, and, I mean, not that it couldn't happen, right?
yeah.
We certainly have circumstances where, it was before most of your time, but when Phil McGrath owned the Iron Horse Grill, it was in a village-owned building. And Phil, I would say this with Phil in the room, was full of opinions, and then would engage many folks in conversations about what the village did or didn't do. And there would, often be some sort of, some snarky suggestion, they're on the take for Phil, or they got it in for Phil, whatever it was. And none of that was ever true, and no one's behavior ever validated that. It was just kind of the snarky talk that people engage. If you look on a couple of these Facebook posts, I mean, I've been accused of being on the take hundreds of times by people I've never met who don't live in Pleasanton. Okay, so as the mayor of White Plains, Tom Roach, said at one point, he said it was a particularly vociferous argument, that he came home and his wife said, "So what do you do with all the money that apparently they're giving you?" I don't see. Our lifestyle hasn't gotten any better.
But to be clear, where I wouldn't go is I wouldn't go out to have a lot of dinners with a developer who is seeking an exemption from the village board to zoning.
Totally agree.
Right.
Just because that is the appearance of
Totally agree.
that kind of relationship
Right.
with somebody who's not even a voter in the village, right?
That's true.
And, I have quite a few times pissed people off when I won't let them, whatever, I go to lunch, someone wants to talk about something, they want to pay. No, it's better for both of us. I'm going to pay. Right?
Yes, I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the things that you have to be careful about.
Right, even though it's in many cases a de minimis value. It's so interesting. The state legislators, they passed some sort of rule that they couldn't accept free meals. And it used to be Municipal Official Association. We would always go to the legislative conference in February and invite the entire delegation out to a restaurant. And most of them came. And then when we couldn't pay for it, most of them didn't.
It's called the cheap bastard. And we're all in agreement now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay. Fun.
So
All
Eric,
right.
can you update the local law and?
Yeah, I'll send you the updated local law. I guess you can't set a public hearing in the work session, or you have to wait
No,
till
we can't.
we already-
next meeting? Okay.
We scheduled it for the 22nd, so if you could get it.
Oh, you did
live.
schedule it for the 22nd. Okay,
Yeah.
yep. So then we're good. I will send you that tomorrow. I have it drafted already, so I will send it to you. Okay.
Great. All right, Bernie, thank you for this.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Very much
Yeah, Bernie,
appreciated.
thank you, Bernie, for all your work on it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, no problem. Take care.